He had always been a nameless boy in the streets of King's Landing, a bastard without station or fortune, forging metal for men who would never care to know his name. The war was over now, at least the war that concerned the living against the dead. But Gendry, once Gendry Waters, though some had taken to calling him Gendry Baratheon in hushed voices, found no rest. The world had changed in the aftermath of the Great War. The North had barely recovered from its scarring battles, and King's Landing stood in ruins after the Dragon Queen's fury. Yet from the rubble of centuries of lies and betrayal, new seeds of power threatened to bloom. It was in these unsettled days that the whispers began, carried from tavern to tavern, from Lord's Hall to dark alleyway. He is the last surviving son of Robert Baratheon. The realm might be crying out for him if only he would listen. They said that once, a red comet had burned overhead when dragons returned to Westeros. Now, after the destruction, after the smoldering devastation left by Daenerys Targaryen's final rampage through the city, people searched the skies for another sign. But the heavens offered only smoke by day and emptiness by night. In the gloom of a ruined world, many sought hope in the echo of old lineages, in the possibility that the blood of great kings still survived. Unrest crackled in the air like a storm waiting to break. The North had crowned its own king once, Jon Snow, the reluctant Targaryen, only for Jon to lay aside claims and vanish into the cold lands beyond the wall, as if seeking anonymity in the wake of betrayal and heartbreak. Queen Sansa Stark ruled the North, now fully independent from the Iron Throne, while her sister Arya roamed across the seas, elusive as a whisper. Bran the Broken had taken the throne in King's Landing, but that arrangement had proven tenuous for a kingdom still reeling from the war. Even with the remnants of the small council guiding him, King Bran's health was fragile, his body frail, and the realm faced unrest from lords, who felt that a new era had begun with too many uncertain pieces. Gendry had no taste for politics, but politics had a taste for him. Standing at the forge in Winterfell, snow drifting around him in gentle spirals, he hammered out new blades for the guards who patrolled the northern roads. He was still a blacksmith in spirit, though he wore the title Lord of Storm's End, gifted to him by Queen Daenerys in what felt like another lifetime. Storm's End had been a ruin in all but name, its finances in disarray, its men scattered or dead, the grand old fortress overlooking the Stormlands more a hollow promise of power than any real seat of might. Yet that tenuous title made him a figure of sudden importance. Lord Gendry Baratheon. The name was strange on his tongue. But the folk of the Stormlands had begun to rally behind him, the memory of his father, Robert the Usurper, Robert the Beloved, still strong in their hearts. And when ravens flew north from the Stormlands, carrying pleas for their young lord to return and lead them, Sansa Stark noticed. She was queen in the north, wise and more commanding with every passing moon. Her red hair shimmered in the winter sunlight as she stepped across the frosted training yard, cloak dragging the ground. She paused beneath the ramparts to watch him work the forge. Gendry felt her presence before he saw her. Even with the howling winds that cloaked the courtyard, he could sense a shift in the air. When he glanced up, there she was, studying him through a soft haze of snow. Despite the chill, she wore no gloves. Her quiet confidence had replaced the timid girl from King's Landing. She seemed very much a Stark of Winterfell now, regal in bearing and calculating in mind. She asked him, "Do you know how many letters I've received, telling me that the Stormlands clamor for their lord to come home?" Gendry wiped the sweat from his forehead, though the cold air bit at his skin. "Too many, I'd wager. I suppose they want me to fix their problems. I'm no good at that." Sansa stepped closer. "I hear differently. The men who ride with you, the ones who escorted you from the south, they speak of your fairness. That you do not allow petty squabbling among your ranks. That you wield a sense of justice they have not seen in a Baratheon since your father in his prime." He set the hammer aside. "My father? Robert was a great warrior, but—" He hesitated. He did not know how to speak ill of a man he never truly knew, but he also knew the stories of Robert's wrath, his endless feasts, and the way he neglected real governance. "I'm not him," he finished, not sure whether that was an apology or a statement of pride. "And yet," Sansa said, "you bear his name. You carry his blood. There are lords in the Stormlands who remember a time when King Robert made them feel secure, invincible. And with everything that has happened, There are still those who believe the throne belongs rightfully to the Baratheons. If they cannot follow Robert, they will follow you. What do ye? Gendry's laugh was hollow. The throne. That can't be serious. Her expression did not waver. Everything is serious now. The realm is torn. There are rumors of more conflicts stirring, of old lords who resent King Bran's rule, believing it was forced upon them by a council reeling from war. And the Iron Islands have grown restless again. Yara Greyjoy might turn to raiding if King's Landing seems too weak. Dorne, well, the Martells want autonomy more than ever after seeing what happened in the final battles. She paused, letting the wind buffet her cloak around her ankles. King Bran, he is wise, but he cannot fight for them. He cannot appear in the throne room as Robert or Tywin or even Tommen once did. He sees everything, but he acts too slowly sometimes. More and more, the lords wonder if they need a king of flesh and blood rather than a half-mythic figure on the throne. It makes them uneasy. Nan. Gendry understood her meaning. If the realm was fracturing, if the Six Kingdoms, those not counting the North's independence, were beginning to slip out of the control of an ailing king, who would keep the peace? Tyrion Lannister served his hand, but Tyrion's cunning alone might not be enough to stave off discontent. Or perhaps it could. Who was Gendry to judge the efforts of a man as canny as Tyrion? But something about the way Sansa studied him suggested she had measured all these possibilities, weighed them in her mind, and decided that Gendry was a piece too significant to ignore. Sansa Stark was no fool. She wanted something from him. He inhaled the cool northern air. What do you want me to do? You have a claim, she said. Stronger than most realize. Born of Robert Baratheon, legitimized by Daenerys. You have a seat at Storm's End that needs your presence. If you return there, if you stabilize that region, if you brought them under a new banner, others might look to you for leadership. Stark support, that would mean a great deal. Nina Kaisa Nigaos. Gendry searched her face. So, you would have me turn the Stormlands into my personal realm? I would have you claim what is yours, Sansa replied. The Baratheon name carries weight. It can unite men who would otherwise fight among themselves. It can anchor the realm in tradition. We need stability, Gendry. The North is free and intends to stay that way, but we will not ignore the plight of the South. If King Bran remains on the throne in name, that may be well enough. But he cannot rule alone. We all know this. And if the lords want more than a regent, if they want an actual king who can ride into battle and hold a feast and wield a warhammer like my father did? Her gaze did not falter. Then the Starks would stand by a Baratheon if that Baratheon proved himself worthy. He felt a ripple of cold excitement run through him, mixed with dread. Gendry was a man who knew the weight of a hammer, the scorching heat of a forge, but the weight of a crown? That was beyond him. Or so he had always thought. But there was a tantalizing possibility here, an offer of support from the most honorable house he had ever known, the Starks who once took him for nothing more than a lad traveling with Arya. If they believed in him, he hardly knew what to think. Instead of further protest, he lifted his blacksmith's hammer again, set a blade on the anvil, and resumed shaping the steel. The clang of metal filled the silence. Sansa watched him for a time, her mind churning with thoughts she did not share, and then she slipped away, leaving only footprints in the snow behind her. Gendry pounded the hot steel, sparks dancing around him like tiny embers. Each strike resounded in his chest, and in that cadence, he felt the echo of something older, the hammer blows that had once crowned a usurper as king, the force that had toppled the Targaryens and planted House Baratheon on the Iron Throne. Perhaps history circled around. Perhaps fate had other plans for him. In the weeks that followed, an uneasy hush fell over Winterfell. Queen Sansa had sent ravens to the Stormlands, to the Riverlands, to the Vale. She was gathering news, forging alliances, quietly letting the realm know that the North was watching. One frigid dawn, a council of northern lords met in the Great Hall. Gendry was summoned alongside them. The conversation was blunt, filled with talk of how thinly stretched King Bran's supporters were in King's Landing. Tyrion Lannister, as Hand, labored to maintain a semblance of order among the fractious lords. Sir Davos had returned to the Narrow Sea, seeking to open trade routes to salvage the economy. Brienne of Tarth patrolled the Crown lands, keeping an eye on roving bands of outlaws. Everywhere the realm tested the new peace, looking for cracks. Ed Tollett, now the commander of the Queen's Guard in the north, confided rumors that the Lannisters, those remnants loyal to Casterly Rock, still seethed at the Targaryen destruction of their seat of power in King's Landing. The word rebellion was whispered more often than any were comfortable admitting. Jon Snow was gone, wandering beyond the wall with the wildlings, leaving no trace for months. Sansa wore her worry in small furrows on her brow, yet she seldom spoke his name. In her, Gendry recognized a resolve born of trauma. She would do what she must for her people. Meanwhile, Arya's name came up in passing, but no one knew her whereabouts. Sailed west of Westeros, some said, as though that were explanation enough. Of the siblings, only Bran was near, and he was consumed with the burdens of kingship from hundreds of leagues away, half lost in his own visions. At times, it felt as though the entire realm was cracking like ice on a lake, ready to split apart if one more stone was tossed. One day, Sansa invited Gendry to walk with her beyond the walls of Winterfell. The snow drifts were high, the wind biting, but she led him to a small frozen pond in a copse of gnarled trees. Stopping at the edge of the pond, she gazed across its white expanse. Ned Stark once told me that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Our father believed in earning his power. You've never seemed to me like a man who shrinks from hard work or responsibility. He touched the hilt of the sword at his hip, a steel head forged for himself. I can swing a sword well enough if I need to. But this, claiming leadership, forging alliances, it's not the same. It's not. But you won't be alone if you try. She turned to face him fully, her cheeks reddened by the cold. Gendry, do you want this? Because if you do not, it's best that we speak plainly. The realm does not need another reluctant ruler. A half measure will tear us further apart. It struck him then that she was offering him more than a suggestion. She was placing her faith in him, giving him a path. I can't say I've dreamt of being a king, Gendry said slowly. All my life I was just that bastard boy in Flea Bottom forging swords and hoping to get by. When I learned who my father was, it felt like a sick joke. But then I saw what war does to people. I saw how men cling to power, and it made me think, maybe I could do better. I don't know. Even at Storm's End I hardly know how to rule. But if I abandon it, the Stormlands could become a battlefield for every lord with ambition. No. She nodded. And if the Stormlands fall, King's Landing follows, and then the chaos spreads. And what of Bran? He asked. I've no desire to rip the throne out from under him. He was kind to me when I was just a traveling companion of Arya's. Bran sees more than we do, Sansa replied. He also understands that a realm that cannot obey or respect its king will soon have no king at all. For now, his claim stands. But if the lords demand a more active ruler, well, some arrangement may have to be made. Perhaps a co-regency, perhaps something else. She searched his eyes. But if you do this, you must be prepared for the possibility that they will want you to be king outright. Gendry's heart hammered in his chest with a thud louder than the blacksmith's anvil. Yet he found himself uttering words that surprised even him. Then let me at least see what becomes of the Stormlands first. Sansa's smile was slight and fleeting but genuine. Then we'll prepare a retinue. In the days that followed, plans were laid. Word was sent to various houses across the Stormlands. House Caron, House Swan, House Dondarrion, House Tarth, the lesser houses, and any landed knights who might rally to the Baratheon name. Sansa composed letters with the quiet precision of a spider weaving a web. Gendry oversaw the blacksmiths forging new arms for their guard. They selected a modest escort of northern knights and soldiers loyal to House Stark but large enough to signal that Gendry traveled with the North's blessing. Rumors spread throughout Winterfell, and men in the courtyard spoke in hushed tones of a possible new claimant. Some were uneasy, recalling the horrors of the recent wars. Others clung to the promise of renewed stability. And so they set out one morning as the pale winter sun broke over the castle walls. Gendry, Sansa, and a retinue of 200 men-at-arms, a small handful of lords from the north, plus a train of supplies. The great gates of Winterfell opened, and they rode south toward the Neck. As they passed the last bastion of the north, Moat Caelin's ruins looming around them like silent sentinels of a forgotten age, Gendry felt his heart pound with apprehension. This was no simple errand. It felt like a journey into destiny. Snow gave way to cold rain as they traveled down the King's Road. The land around them bore the scars of war: burned farmhouses, fields left untended, villages struggling to rebuild. Occasionally they would see children peeking out from behind fences, no joy in their eyes, only caution. As the party pressed into the riverlands, the weather grew milder, the rivers swollen by winter melt. Sansa and Gendry rarely rode side by side, as she often conversed with northern lords or consulted privately with her advisors. But sometimes when the road was quiet and the men drifted ahead or behind, they found themselves together, speaking in hushed voices of the tasks to come. Gendry noticed a softness in her eyes when she looked at him, a quiet empathy for the burden he carried. He recalled his times traveling with Arya, how she had always seemed to trust him despite his low birth. Now her sister was trusting him in a far greater way. The thought almost paralyzed him with gratitude and dread. They reached the Crossroads Inn. Word had preceded them, and Lady Brienne of Tarth was there, having ridden ahead from King's Landing to scout the road for them. She greeted Sansa with a respectful bow, and there was a warmth in her gaze that Gendry found reassuring. Lady Brienne was a living symbol of honor. Her presence told him that perhaps they were doing the right thing. They continued south, crossing the Blackwater Rush, where Gendry remembered once rowing for hours at Sir Davos' command, escaping the Red Witch's influence. The memory of the nightmares that had nearly claimed him in those days flickered through his mind. Leeches and dark blood, the threat of sacrifice for king's blood. He was older now, more scarred, perhaps wiser. If the Lord of Light still had designs on him, he had not felt them in years. Yet, it was impossible to shake the sense that his life had been guided by forces he only dimly understood. Finally, the gray silhouette of Storm's End appeared on the horizon, perched on the edge of the sea like a stubborn sentinel against the storms that gave the castle its name. The fortress was vast, its drums tower rising above the surging waves. Gendry's heart ached with a mix of familiarity and uncertainty. The last time he had seen Storm's End, he had been half in awe, half terrified, newly legitimized but completely unprepared for what that meant. Now, with winter near its end, the skies over the Stormlands churned with clouds that threatened rain instead of snow. A cold wind whipped through the banners as they approached the gate. And as the portcullis rose, Gendry saw men lining the walls to watch his approach. A murmur went up from the people within, small folk who had taken shelter near the castle for safety. They stood in ragged clusters, some missing limbs or eyes, bearing the scars of war. When Gendry rode in, clad in simple black leathers with a golden stag sigil pinned to his cloak, he saw hope in their eyes. Or was it desperation? He dismounted in the courtyard, and Sansa Stark followed suit. The local steward, a man named Mathis, bowed low and addressed Gendry as, "My lord," voice trembling with a combination of relief and nerves. Gendry nodded, feeling sweat gather at his temples despite the chill wind. In the grand hall of Storm's End, the lords of the Stormlands who had answered his summons arrayed themselves. Some were older men who remembered Robert Baratheon's youth. Some were younger heirs who had never known a Baratheon lord. Gendry felt all their eyes upon him. Sansa stood slightly behind him, lending him quiet strength. He introduced himself simply, acknowledging them as neighbors, not as a king or conqueror. At first, they assessed him with wariness. But then one by one they declared fealty, reaffirming their oaths to the rightful Lord of Storm's End. Some did so with genuine fervor, for the Baratheons had once been the paramount house here. Others seemed to do so out of calculation, reading the writing on the wall. The Stark presence did not go unnoticed. To show scorn for Gendry might provoke the formidable North as well. After the assembly, Gendry retired with a few of the prominent lords to discuss the state of the Stormlands. They were a proud people, toughened by the storms that battered their coasts. Many had been loyal to Stannis Baratheon once, though Stannis' memory did not inspire nostalgia. Still, the region felt the absence of a Baratheon presence. There had been attempts by lesser lords to claim dominion, but none commanded true loyalty. Much of the farmland lay neglected, and the roads were plagued by bandits. Gendry swallowed hard, realizing the sheer enormity of the task. He was expected to bring order to this chaos, to breathe new life into a land battered by years of war. Sansa supported him deftly. She spoke with an authority that drew the Lord's respect. She offered suggestions on rebuilding the main roadways, on establishing a rotating guard to keep bandits at bay, and on setting up supply lines from the north to bridge the months needed for the Stormlands to become self-sufficient again. Her practical mind for governance shone through, and Gendry found himself leaning on her counsel. He had ideas too, but she helped shape them into workable plans. He realized that while he might be the face the Stormlanders rallied behind, Sansa Stark was the quiet architect of stability. He admired her all the more for that. Days turned into weeks, and Gendry's retinue expanded as local knights and sworn swords joined his cause. Efforts were made to protect travelers along the roads. Craftsmen in Storm's End resumed their trades. The courtyard rang once again with the sounds of blacksmiths forging tools, masons repairing walls. A sense of renewal seeped into the battered stones of the fortress. People looked to Gendry and saw not just the memory of Robert but something new, someone earnest and determined to do better. At night, by the warmth of a roaring hearth, Sansa and Gendry conferred about politics far beyond the Stormlands. Rumors kept flooding in from King's Landing. King Bran, seldom seen, had retreated deeper into his visions. Some lords wondered if the realm had a ghost for a king. Tyrion struggled to hold the pieces together. The tension at court crackled. Meanwhile, from the Westerlands came word that certain Lannister bannermen still grumbled for the restoration of a strong king. A king, ironically, they might find in Gendry, if only to dethrone a Stark legacy. Whispers abounded. The Vale remained relatively calm, as Lord Robert Arryn had grown docile under the watch of his regents. But the Iron Islands tested King Bran's authority by launching small raids upon the coasts of the Reach. Dorne seethed in half-open defiance, demanding greater autonomy. One moonlit evening, Gendry strolled along the battlements of Storm's End, the salt wind lashing his face. He stared out at the dark sea. Sansa approached, her cloak billowing around her, and for a moment, neither spoke. They listened to the waves crash against the ancient walls. "I never wanted this," Gendry murmured at last, not turning. "But seeing how people here need help, how the realm teeters on the edge, I can't just walk away." She stood by him, close enough that he felt the warmth of her body in the cold night air. "That is why you might be the best person for the role. Those who crave power rarely use it well. Those who are cautious with power might wield it more wisely." "Nenoria Dije." He gave a wry chuckle. "I fear I'm not that wise. I've watched you, Gendry. You learn, you listen, you try to do better than those who came before. That is enough to begin." They stood in silence a while longer, the distant lightning flickering on the horizon as a storm brewed offshore. The waves hissed against the castle's massive foundations. Gendry allowed himself a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. But in the next breath, dread returned. The realm was still a tinderbox. All it would take was a single spark. The spark came sooner than expected. A raven arrived at dawn, bearing grim news from King's Landing. A rebellious faction within the Crownlands, spurred on by disaffected Lannister bannermen and certain ambitious knights, had begun openly questioning Bran's legitimacy. They gathered under a banner of the lion, twisted now into a symbol of vengeance. Tyrion struggled to negotiate, but it was rumored that some of the City Watch had sided with these discontents, disillusioned by what they perceived as a broken king. In the Red Keep, tensions mounted. King Bran had reportedly dismissed any calls for a show of force. He believed in letting the conspirators reveal themselves before acting, but that inaction emboldened them. Sansa read the Raven's message in the Great Hall, her eyes darkening with concern. Around her stood Gendry and the assembled knights of Storm's End. When she finished, she looked to Gendry. "We cannot let King's Landing fall into chaos again. If these rebels seize control, we'll have war across the realm, and it will be 1,000 times harder to rebuild." The Stormlands lords murmured agreements. Some of them had no love for the Lannisters, having fought under Robert's rebellion. But they despised lawless chaos even more. Tyrion might be a Lannister, but he was also the hand of the king, and the realm could not survive another bloody coup. Gendry's stomach twisted. He had spent years of his life in that city, forging steel in Flea Bottom, never imagining he'd one day have to ride in as a lord, or more. He cleared his throat. We ride for King's Landing. We restore order in the king's name, King Bran's name. We can't let the realm tear itself apart. I won't stand by and watch them put innocents to the sword. Sansa nodded. We must move swiftly. The rebels may strike soon, trying to take advantage of King Bran's limited capacity to respond. A thunderous crash of waves punctuated her words, as if the sea itself roared approval. The assembled knights echoed Gendry's call, their voices filling the hall. In that moment, Gendry realized he was no longer simply the blacksmith who once followed others. He was leading them. And it frightened him. Yet it also lit a new fire in his veins, a sense of purpose that hammered in his chest like a forge. Preparations began at once. Storm's End was not the seat of an enormous standing army, but loyal men answered the horn calls. Banners were unfurled, golden stags on black fields, some frayed from age yet still proud. Northern knights readied themselves to ride under the direwolf banner, though Sansa's smaller retinue was modest compared to the full might of the north. Ravens flew to other loyal houses in the Crown Lands, to the small but proud alliances forged during the War of the Five Kings, urging them to join Gendry and maintain peace under King Bran. If the rebels wanted to depose the broken king, let them know that a Baratheon, his blood once enthroned, would defend Bran's seat. Within a fortnight, Gendry's forces set out. They marched along the storm-lashed coast and then inland toward the Roserat. The mood was tense, the men uncertain whether they marched to quell a minor uprising or plunge into a full-scale war. As they neared the outskirts of King's Landing, the once familiar smell of smoke and sewage drifted through the air. The city's walls loomed ahead, partially repaired from the dragonfire that had ravaged them, but scars remained. Columns of black smoke curled from random points, suggesting unrest within. Word reached them that the rebels had seized control of several key gates, forcing loyalists to hole up in the Red Keep and the surrounding wards. The city watch was divided. Some gold cloaks remained loyal, others had defected. The small folk were terrified, caught yet again in the midst of powerful players struggling for the Iron Throne. Outside the southern gate, Gendry halted his host. Sansa rode up beside him, her face grave. They could hear shouts from within the city, sporadic clashes of steel, screams echoing through the narrow streets. Gendry took a deep breath. This was it. All the day spent forging a precarious peace in the Stormlands would mean nothing if King's Landing fell to chaos. He glanced at Sansa, seeking reassurance, and found her gaze steady. She gave a small nod. She believed in him. That was enough. He signaled his bannermen forward. A group of Stormlanders approached the main gate, carrying a stag banner high. They demanded entry in the name of Lord Gendry Baratheon and Queen Sansa Stark. For a tense minute, nothing happened. Then a flurry of motion atop the walls. A contingent of rebels peered over the battlements. They wore mismatched armor, some with the lion crest of Lannister loyalists, others with no crest at all. One man called out, voice echoing off the stones, "We don't recognize your authority, Baratheon bastard! Turn around or face a rain of arrows!" Sansa stiffened, but Gendry's expression turned grim. He urged his horse forward until he was visible. You stand against the rightful king's authority, not mine alone. Open the gates, and no harm will come to you. Persist in rebellion, and I promise you the Stormlands and the North will not stand idle. Laughter rippled from the walls. An arrow flew out of nowhere, striking the ground inches from Gendry's horse. The animal reared, snorting, but Gendry kept his seat. The message was clear. The rebels would not yield easily. Sansa signaled for archers to move up. If it came to an assault, they would attempt to storm the gates. The city might bleed again. Gendry felt a coil of anger and sorrow in his gut. After all the horrors King's Landing had endured, now it was about to endure more. The memory of that battered realm, burned and bloodied, clung to him. He recalled the sky filled with dragon flame, the screams of innocence. He had no taste for another slaughter. But these rebels would not be placated with words alone. The storm broke when the rebels poured forth from a side gate, hoping to catch Gendry's forces off guard. The clash of swords erupted in the muddy terrain outside the walls. Men screamed, steel rang, horses whinnied and stumbled. Gendry found himself in the thick of it. He wielded a warhammer, the same design once favored by Robert, though simpler in make. With a grunt, he swung it in a wide arc, smashing through a rebel's shield and sending the man sprawling. He felt the reverberation up his arm, heard the crunch of splintering wood, the wet thud of impact. Blood spattered the muddy ground. Sansa stayed behind the main lines with a protective guard, her presence coordinating the archers and ensuring that the flanks held. She was no warrior, but she was a strategist. Gendry pressed forward with knights from the Stormlands and the north. The rebels, disorganized but desperate, fought back with a vicious tenacity. It was a gruesome melee. Gendry tried to remember that these were once men of the realm, not foreign invaders, but their blades were just as deadly, their hearts fueled by rage against the perceived betrayal of a broken king. As the battle churned, more loyalists within the city, led by gold cloaks who had remained true, opened a postern gate. They sallied out to aid Gendry's forces, and together they drove the rebels back. The air filled with smoke from torches and the stench of blood. Broken bodies littered the field. The rebels, outmatched, began to retreat, collapsing back toward the main gate. A few tried to shut it behind them, but Gendry and his men surged forward, forcing their way inside. The gate groaned under the strain. The old city walls, pockmarked by the siege from Daenerys dragons, offered little in the way of renewed strength. The defenders crumbled. Soon, Gendry found himself in the streets of King's Landing, once again immersed in the labyrinth of twisting alleys and battered hovels. Shouts rose from every corner, and small folk fled or cowered. Rebels scattered, some tossing their weapons aside, others rallying in pockets of resistance. The columns of Stormlander and Northern Knights advanced methodically, securing each intersection, pressing on toward the Red Keep. Gendry prayed to any gods listening that he might avoid the mass butchery that had so often characterized battles in this cursed city. Near the remnants of Flea Bottom, Gendry glimpsed the battered forges he had once worked in, now shuttered, half-burned. Memories rushed him, the soot-smeared days spent toiling over the anvil, the oppressive heat, the clamor of men and children scrabbling for scraps. This was his city as much as Robert's Keep or the Targaryen's ancient seat. If he had a duty, it was to these people, as well as to the lords in their high halls. The fight to retake King's Landing lasted the better part of a day. By nightfall, most of the rebels were routed or had surrendered. Loyalist forces and Gendry's men stationed themselves throughout the city, establishing checkpoints. At the Red Keep, they were welcomed by Tyrion Lannister, who appeared on the ramparts looking exhausted, flanked by a regiment of loyal gold cloaks and Sir Brienne of Tarth. Relief flickered in his eyes when he saw Sansa and Gendry. It was a curious reunion, here in the same keep where so many tragedies had occurred. Once inside, they found King Bran in the throne room, sitting upon the Iron Throne, or what remained of it after the ruin brought by dragonfire. Bran's face was pale, his distant eyes betraying only a faint recognition as Gendry knelt. Sansa stood beside him, bowing respectfully. When Tyrion asked after Gendry's presence, Sansa spoke up. "We came to restore order in your name, your grace." Her tone was measured, careful. The Stormlands stand with House Stark in preserving peace for the realm. Bran's voice was quiet, echoing in the vast half-ruined throne room. "Thank you, sister. And you, Lord Baratheon. The city might have descended into deeper chaos without your intervention." Gendry rose slowly, the weight of battle fatigue pressing on him. "We did what had to be done, your grace." He paused, uncertain how to address the complexities swirling in the air. Could Bran hold the throne if such rebellions kept erupting? Did Gendry dare suggest a different solution? He glanced at Tyrion, who wore a guarded expression. "It seems," Tyrion ventured, "that certain lords are discontent. The absence of a visible monarch who can address their concerns, lead them in times of crisis, has made them restless. King Bran's wisdom is unparalleled. But there is more to ruling than foresight. The realm needs stability, presence, tradition." Bran's head tilted slightly as though he listened to the whisper of wind. "They look to the bloodlines of old houses," he said softly, "because that is what they have always done." His eyes shifted to Gendry. "And your father's blood rests in you." A heavy silence settled. Tyrion cleared his throat. "I've spoken to many lords, young Baratheon. They remember your father fondly, or at least the idea of him. King Robert was a larger-than-life figure who ended the Mad King's reign. The realm looks around and sees only uncertainty. A new generation of lords wants a monarch they can rally behind. It is no secret that your claim, through legitimization, is quite strong. Perhaps stronger than any other living souls if we discount King Bran's line. Gendry no. A flicker of something, perhaps sorrow, passed across Bran's face. What the realm wants and what it needs do not always align, yet I cannot hold them by force, nor would I wish to. Sansa's voice broke gently into the hush. Perhaps there is another path. You could remain as king in name, dear brother, but let Gendry Baratheon guide the realm in practice. Our regent, or a co-monarch. The details can be shaped by the small council, but the message must be clear. The crown rests on a living head that can speak to the people's fears. No one would question Gendry's capability to lead men in battle, to walk among the lords and small folk alike. Nay, France. Bran was silent for a time, gazing at nothing and everything. At last he murmured, "The realm is a story we all tell. If this is how it must unfold, so be it. But the choice is not mine alone. Gendry must also choose, and so must the lords of the realm." Tyrion's gaze fell on Gendry. "This is your moment, Lord Baratheon. If you would claim the throne, there will be a great council called. The lords will gather, cast their votes, and confirm either the continuation of King Bran's sole reign or the ascension of a Baratheon, or some arrangement that marries the two. But be warned, once the wheel starts turning, it will be difficult to slow. Are you prepared for that?" "No." Was he? Gendry could still taste the blood and ash in the air, could still feel the exhaustion from hours of battle. He recalled the hunger in people's eyes, the longing for someone to lead them out of ruin. Slowly, he nodded. "I do whatever I must to keep the realm from falling apart. If that means I take on the crown or share it with King Bran, I won't run from it." Sansa's hand brushed his arm in silent encouragement. Tyrion exhaled. Relief and apprehension mingled. "Then let us call a great council. Lords from every corner of Westeros will come to decide. We must move swiftly before the rebels regroup." Thus, the stage was set. Ravens flew to every seat of power, to the Eyrie, to Riverrun, to Pike, to Highgarden, to Sunspear, to Casterly Rock's remains, and all lesser holds. They summoned the great houses, the lesser lords, all who would have a say in choosing the next ruler, or endorsing the current one. Gendry oversaw the tenuous peace in King's Landing as the city cautiously reopened. Bodies of rebel and loyalists alike were laid to rest. Sansa worked tirelessly with Tyrion to ensure the capital did not starve. Shipments of grain arrived from the Reach. Winter was ending, but the land still bore the bruises of devastation. One by one, lords began arriving, some with small retinues, others with large entourages that filled the city's dusty streets. The great hall of the Red Keep was repaired enough to host them, though scorch marks still scarred its walls. King Bran presided in a specially constructed seat on a dais near the Iron Throne, as climbing those steps was difficult for him. Gendry stood at his side, uncertain whether to feel pride or terror. The lords regarded him with a myriad of emotions: curiosity, hope, distrust, skepticism. Sansa took her place beside Gendry, her posture regal, while Tyrion managed the proceedings. This was not the same fractious meeting that had crowned Bran king out of desperation after the war with the dead and Daenerys' downfall. This was a different crisis, a moment of choice for a realm on the edge. Lord Royce of the Vale spoke for his region, and he seemed open to the idea of a Baratheon regent or king. The Tullys of River Run, newly resettled, looked to Sansa Stark with respect, acknowledging the bond of blood with House Stark. Lord Glover of Deepwood Motte, stoic and blunt, expressed that the North was its own kingdom under Queen Sansa. Yet he allowed that if the southern lords needed Gendry Baratheon as king, the North would not stand in the way. The men of the Reach, led by a new cluster of lords who had risen in the vacuum left by House Tyrell, were uncertain, wanting stability for their crops and trade. The Ironborn were restless. Though Yara did not come in person, she sent an envoy who growled that the Iron Islands would do what they pleased, unless the new king recognized their autonomy. Dorne was represented by a young Martell lord who insisted on greater freedoms but seemed amenable to acknowledging a Baratheon on the throne. The Westerland's lords, ironically, were split between loyalty to King Bran, due to Tyrion's influence, and a thirst for vengeance on House Targaryen, which had no real stake anymore, and perhaps an unease about the Starks. Yet many recognized that Gendry was the closest thing to Robert Baratheon's legacy, and that might placate the Stormlands, the Crownlands, and the easily roused smallfolk. For days, arguments raged. Some questioned Gendry's birth, even though Daenerys had legitimized him. Others demanded to know how a man with no upbringing in politics could manage the realm. Gendry answered as best he could, emphasizing that he had Sansa Stark's counsel, Tyrion's experience, and the goodwill of the Stormlands. He spoke plainly of wanting peace, of forging alliances rather than waging war. In private, he confided to Sansa that he felt unready, but she reassured him that humility might be his strongest asset in winning trust. The realm had known enough prideful rulers. Finally, the last day of the council arrived. The lords gathered, tension thick in the air. King Bran looked down upon them from his seat, eyes distant. Tyrion addressed the assembly, recounting the realm's precarious status. Then, with a voice that echoed against the charred walls, he put the question to them: will the lords of Westeros continue to recognize King Bran as sole monarch, or shall they name Gendry Baratheon as king? Or shall the crown be shared in some formal arrangement of co-rule? A murmur spread, and the lords cast their tokens. After hours of consultation, the results were tallied. The verdict was not unanimous. No great council had perfect consensus, but the clear majority favored naming Gendry Baratheon as king, with Bran Stark stepping aside to serve as an advisor and protector of the realms of men, a role that acknowledged his unique gift of sight. Many lords believed in acknowledging Bran's wisdom without forcing him to bear the burdens of day-to-day rule. Thus, Gendry would ascend the throne in a formal coronation, forging a new chapter in the realm's history. A hush fell when the final tally was read. Gendry felt as though a war hammer had crashed into his chest. He glanced at Sansa, who gave him a measured nod. Tyrion turned to King Bran, asking if he would accept the council's decision. Bran inclined his head. I have no desire to rule if the realm will not have me. Let the Baratheon ascend. May his rule restore what was lost. In that moment, Gendry saw both resignation and relief in Bran's distant gaze, as if the boy who had once dreamed of climbing towers and forging a new world had now relinquished the last vestiges of mortal ambition. Tyrion led the assembled lords in a solemn bow toward Gendry. Sansa stepped forward, withdrawing a crown hastily reforged from the rubble of the Red Keep. Its metal gleamed from the melted swords of Robert's time. She approached Gendry, who knelt, heart pounding. The half-ruined throne behind him seemed to watch with hollow eyes. His entire life flashed before him. The pounding of the blacksmith's hammer, Arya's laughter in the woods, Melisandre's dark shadow, the freezing wind of Winterfell, the battered walls of Storm's End. Now this. Sansa placed the crown upon his head. Her hands trembled slightly, or perhaps that was his imagination. All hail Gendry of the House Baratheon, she said, voice clear, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. She paused, glancing at the northern lords, remembering that the north was now independent, or rather the Six Kingdoms, and protector of the realm. A collective exhalation seemed to shake the hall. The lords bowed more deeply. Gendry rose to his feet, the crown's weight foreign and unsettling. He looked out across the assembled faces, seeing in them expectation, doubt, fear, and hope. He had never felt more uncertain of himself, and yet never more determined to do right by them. As if sensing his turmoil, Sansa placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Tyrion moved forward to formalize the new king's oath. Gendry gave it, voice strong, pledging to protect the realm from harm, to honor the old alliances, to ensure justice prevailed. The men assembled shouted, "Long live the king!" Some with genuine joy, others with cautious acceptance. That night, the city erupted in celebration, or at least as much celebration as could be mustered after the day's tensions. Taverns poured ale, people gathered in the streets, curious to see the new king. Gendry felt overwhelmed by the sudden shift in fortune. Just days ago he had been forging alliances for Storm's End. Now he wore a crown hammered from the remnants of past rulers. He paced the royal chambers, on Cersei's apartments, though heavily damaged and barely refurbished. Even with the crown on a table nearby, he felt no comfort in the lavish surroundings. He could still smell the ash that lingered in the stones, as if the ghosts of the war refused to depart. Sansa found him there, gazing out at the twinkling lights of the city. She approached softly. Neither spoke for a moment. Then she said, "The realm has chosen you, though some lords remain guarded. You will need to earn their trust." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not my father. If they expect feasts and tourneys every fortnight, they'll be disappointed. I just want to keep them safe." She smiled a little. "That might be enough, Gendry Baratheon." His gaze moved to her. The flicker of torchlight caught in her hair, and for a brief moment he recalled how Arya had once teased him, how he never quite understood the ways of highborn girls. Yet here was Sansa, someone who had known the worst of politics and survived it, who had believed in him when few else would. "I am grateful for everything," he said. "You've guided me every step of the way. I don't know how I can repay that." "You'll repay it by ruling well," she answered. "By doing what must be done, no matter how difficult." He nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "Then I promise I'll do my best. And for the North, you have my word that I'll recognize Queen Sansa Stark. No man can rule the North but a Stark, and I won't pretend otherwise." A flicker of relief crossed her features. They understood each other. The North would remain an ally, not a subject. In that quiet understanding lay the foundation of a new political order. One that might, if guided with care, bring an end to the cycle of endless war. In the days and weeks that followed, King Gendry Baratheon set about the immense task of rebuilding King's Landing. Tyrion resumed his role as Hand, employing every ounce of his cunning to secure trade deals, quell rebellious pockets, and administer the crown's depleted coffers. Sansa spent much of her time in the capital helping stabilize the transition of power, though she planned eventually to return to Winterfell. Lords from across the realm, eager to gauge their new king, visited. Some sought favor, others sought reassurance. Gendry greeted them in a new style of court, less formal than the old Lannister courts, more open to hearing the concerns of commoners. He listened to petitions about farmland disputes, shipping routes, and the dozens of mundane matters that kept the realm functioning. He missed his forge sometimes, but the anvil he now beat upon was the kingdom itself. Word spread across the seas, too. In Braavos and Pentos, merchants wondered what this new Baratheon king meant for trade. Some joked that the blacksmith king might craft a more stable realm. Others scoffed, recalling Robert's drunken extravagances. But the initial signs were promising. Gendry's natural humility endeared him to commoners, even if some high lords found him less regal than they preferred. He made a point to walk through Flea Bottom to speak with blacksmiths and orphan children, shocking the city watch who scrambled to protect him. But that simple act of empathy won hearts. More might be required to win the entire realm, but it was a start. The greatest challenge emerged from the Ironborn. They tested the new king's mettle by launching raids near the shields off the coast of the Reach, expecting the new monarch to be slow to respond or too weak to enforce his rule. But Gendry, mindful of the lessons of old King Robert, sent a swift naval force, bolstered by ships from the Stormlands and the Crownlands, to push them back. He accompanied them personally, leading from the deck of a warship. The Ironborn, taken aback by such direct action from a king who had barely warmed the throne, retreated in disarray. Diplomacy followed. Gendry was willing to allow the Iron Islands a measure of self-governance if they refrained from piracy. Forceful but fair, he negotiated with Yara's representatives. Eventually, a tenuous accord was reached. Although the Ironborn would always chafe at any overlord, they accepted Gendry's terms for now, especially after seeing he was not merely a figurehead. Dorne, too, pressed for more autonomy. Gendry met with the new Prince of Dorne in the newly rebuilt Royal Solar, hearing out the Dornish request for near-complete self-rule. Rather than dismiss them, he recognized Dorne's unique culture and history, offering them reduced taxes in exchange for loyalty in times of war. The prince, somewhat disarmed by the king's straightforward approach, conceded that a flexible arrangement might indeed serve Dorne. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step toward reducing resentments that had festered for generations. Through each challenge, Sansa's advice was invaluable. She knew too well the dangers of cunning courtiers and the betrayals lurking behind pretty words. Tyrion was a master of negotiating the labyrinth of southern politics, but Sansa offered insight into reading people's intentions, gleaned from her years surviving the Lannisters and Littlefinger. Together they formed a triad of sorts. Gendry the Forging King, Sansa the Northern Queen, Tyrion the Clever Hand. King Bran resided quietly within the Red Keep, sometimes advising them with cryptic remarks that suggested his far sight. He seemed content to watch events unfold, free of the burden of direct rule. As the realm slowly stabilized, roads were rebuilt, trade caravans journeyed once more between the major cities, and the scars of war began to fade, though no one would soon forget the devastation caused by dragons and tyrants. Gendry's greatest triumph might have been in uniting the Stormlands under his direct oversight. That land grew prosperous again, encouraging other regions to invest in rebuilding rather than raising arms. The Crownlands, too, regained a semblance of peace, as the City Watch was reorganized under loyal captains who remembered Gendry from his days as a blacksmith, forging their blades. Months passed and seasons shifted. The snows in the north receded, though winter had lasted longer than usual. In King's Landing, the climate turned mild, allowing farmland around the Blackwater to yield new crops. A sense of cautious optimism settled over the realm. Some lords and merchants even spoke of holding a grand tournament to celebrate the new king's coronation and the fragile peace. Gendry hesitated. Grand tournaments reminded him too much of Robert's extravagances, but Tyrion argued that a demonstration of prosperity could boost morale. Sansa agreed that it might help unify the lords under one banner, showing them that the realm was open for something other than war. At length, Gendry relented. Plans were drawn for a tournament, albeit more modest than the lavish affairs once held by the Targaryens. When the day arrived, knights from across Westeros congregated in King's Landing, their banners bright in the sun. Wooden stands were erected outside the city, near the charred remnants of what had once been fields ravaged by dragonfire. Now, new growth sprouted in the blackened soil, an apt symbol of rebirth. Gendry presided over the opening ceremonies, seated on a dais with Tyrion at one side and Sansa at the other. He wore the crown, though it still felt heavy on his head, and a cloth of gold doublet bearing the crown's stag sigil. The small folk cheered as he entered, some chanting, "Baratheon! Baratheon!" He scanned the crowd, remembering how, in his youth, he had been but one face among thousands, unnoticed, unknown. The surge of emotion nearly overwhelmed him. The jousting began. Among the participants were knights from the Vale, men from the Reach brandishing newly minted tabards, Stormlanders eager to prove their mettle in front of their king, and even a few from Dorne. The North sent fewer contestants, as tourneys were not their forte, but a handful of knights competed, carrying the direwolf banner. Trumpets blared, hooves thundered, and lances shattered on shields. Victory cries mixed with the roars of the crowd. Vendors sold ale, pies, and roasted meats. Children laughed, chasing each other in the stands. For a day, it felt like the realm had found some measure of joy again. During a break in the matches, Sansa and Gendry strolled among the pavilions, accompanied by a small guard. Knights and ladies bowed respectfully. Laughter and conversation permeated the air. They came across a small group of armorers displaying their wares, polished steel gleaming in the sun. Gendry paused to admire the craftsmanship. One of the armorers, an older man with a weathered face, recognized the king and bowed awkwardly. "Your Grace, it's an honor. I heard you were once a smith yourself. Perhaps you'd like to test the balance of this sword?" He offered a finely wrought blade, the pommel shaped into a stag's head. Gendry hefted it, feeling the weight. "It's good work," he remarked, giving it a test swing. "Edges are balanced. A proud weapon." He returned it with a small smile. "Reminds me of the swords I forged in Fleabottom, though you've got far better tools here." The armorer beamed, puffing out his chest. Sansa watched the exchange with a soft smile, seeing how effortlessly Gendry connected with a humble craftsman. It was in such moments that the difference between him and his father was stark. Robert Baratheon had been a warrior and a reveler, but Gendry understood the labor of a common man. Small folk noticed that, and it kindled a different kind of loyalty. They continued on, and eventually returned to the dais. The final rounds of the joust concluded with a Stormlander knight emerging victorious, to great cheers from his comrades. A modest feast followed, and the day ended with the lighting of braziers around the tournament grounds, music playing well into the night. Gendry mingled among the guests, careful to maintain the kingly decorum expected of him, but still mindful to be approachable. He conversed with lords about trade, with knights about the war's lingering wounds, with ladies about the new fashions emerging in the capital. He spotted Sansa speaking quietly to Tyrion across the way. Their expressions were animated, as though they shared a private joke. Late in the evening, Gendry slipped away from the throng and found a quiet place overlooking the black water. Torches glimmered along the river. From here, the city looked alive and hopeful, the sprawl of rooftops lit by lanterns. The outlines of towers and half-rebuilt spires etched the skyline. His heart felt full, yet still laced with doubt. Could he truly guide this realm into lasting peace? Or would they face yet another war, another uprising, because tradition demanded constant conflict? Behind him, Sansa's voice spoke. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Hard to believe it was in flames not so long ago." Narrodile. He turned to see her, hair half-pinned, a few strands escaping in the evening breeze. He replied. "Sometimes I still see the smoke, smell the burning corpses. It haunts me." She stepped closer, the soft rustle of her gown mingling with the crackle of torchlight. "Rebuilding takes time. But you've done more than many thought possible. The small folk speak of you with genuine respect. They remember how your father won the throne through bloodshed, but you are forging a kingdom through service." "No." He looked away, uncertain how to bear her praise. "I only hope it lasts." She touched his arm gently. "With wise decisions it might. You have good counselors, men and women who believe in a better future." His eyes found hers, and for a moment, the weight of kingship lifted, replaced by the simple closeness of another person who understood. They stood in shared silence, the city stretching before them, the promise of a new era whispering in the dark. If winter taught them anything, it was that the night could be survived, and morning could bring a second chance. The next month saw continued stabilization. Gendry ruled from the Iron Throne, though it was more a symbolic seat than the actual source of his strength. He spent as much time in council chambers, dealing with the intricacies of law and governance, as he did hearing audiences in the throne room. Some lords tried to test him, attempting to bribe or manipulate him into favorable decrees, but his honest nature and Sansa's counsel saw through such ploys. He expanded the city's watch, insisting on better training and pay to reduce corruption. Slowly, King's Landing began to feel less like a den of vipers and more like a functioning capital. Peace treaties were extended to the north, reaffirming its sovereignty under Queen Sansa. In exchange, the North remained an ally, ready to come to the aid of the Six Kingdoms if external threats arose. Dorne's arrangement held and trade flourished with the free cities again. Even the Iron Islands, while never fully docile, reigned in their raids, seeing that Gendry was not afraid to respond quickly to any aggression. The seeds of a new Pax Westerosi were sown, though whether they would bloom in the long run was a matter of vigilance. Amidst these state affairs, Gendry found moments to indulge his old passions. On certain evenings, he'd slip into a lesser courtyard with a portable forge and hammer out small items, nails, horseshoes, simple tasks that reminded him of who he was. The Red Keep servants would whisper about the king forging metal at night, but the rumor only endeared him further to the people, a king who hadn't forgotten the common labor that sustained the realm. Then came the day that war flared up again on Westerosi's soil, though only on a small scale. A group of rogue sellswords, calling themselves the Red Lions, began raiding along the borders between the Crownlands and the Reach. They declared no loyalty to Gendry, claiming they fought for some lost Lannister heir, a fabrication, but enough to stir trouble among those still loyal to the old house. Gendry responded decisively, dispatching a seasoned force of Crownland knights and Stormlander soldiers. He led them personally, pushing into the outskirts where the raids occurred. The Red Lions were swiftly cornered in a small fortress near the Manor. After a brief siege, they surrendered. Gendry ordered their leaders tried and punished according to the law. Most were hanged, though he showed mercy to the common sellswords, allowing them a chance to swear allegiance or depart Westeros altogether. It was a stark reminder to any would-be rebels that the new king would not tolerate senseless violence. As the realm settled again, the harvest rolled in, and small folk feasted with renewed vigor. Gendry declared a festival of gratitude, inviting lords and small folk alike to gather in the city to celebrate the bounty. He remembered the hunger that once gripped King's Landing, the half-rations and riots. Now, wagons arrived full of grain, fruits, and salted meats. The people danced in the squares. Minstrels sang ballads of the Smith King, weaving tales of how a boy from Flea Bottom rose to wear a crown. Gendry found it surreal, but he accepted it as part of the realm's healing process. One evening during the festival, Gendry and Sansa strolled through the streets in disguise, accompanied by only a few guards at a distance. Incognito, they watched puppet shows mocking the old wars and praising the new peace. They sampled honeycakes from a street vendor, took in the bright lanterns strung between buildings. The city's scars remained, but new life pulsed around every corner. Laughter replaced the weeping that once filled these lanes. They paused in front of a small group of children dancing to a fiddler's tune, their faces lit with simple delight. Sansa exhaled softly. It feels strange to see King's Landing like this after all the horrors. Gendry nodded. I know. But maybe this is what we fought for, what we endured all that pain for. A chance for people to dance in the streets without fear. Nay. She watched him carefully, her eyes reflecting the warm glow of lantern light. You've given them that chance, Gendry. He shrugged, feeling embarrassed by the praise. We've all done our part. A gentle smile touched her lips. Still, you've proven yourself more than capable of ruling, forging alliances, and meeting challenges head-on. The realm is safer for it. He hesitated, suddenly aware of how close she stood. Her presence comforted him, stirred him. Their gazes locked in the flickering light. A swirl of music drifted around them. He remembered her strength, her kindness, her unwavering support. The world seemed to hold its breath. But just then, the children giggled loudly, and a passerby jostled them, prompting Gendry to break the spell. He gestured for them to continue walking. The moment passed, yet its warmth lingered. Returning to the Red Keep that night, Gendry found Tyrion waiting in the council chamber. The hand looked thoughtful. Your Grace, there's been word from across the sea. Braavos extends greetings to the new Baratheon king, wishing to resume normal relations. They also quietly hint they'd welcome your presence in a diplomatic visit, perhaps to discuss certain debts left over from prior reigns. Tyrion's wry smile emerged. Should we plan for that? Gendry sighed. Debts. Always debts. Yes, we should, though I'll need time to prepare. The realm's stable, but I don't want to leave it too soon. Tyrion clapped him on the shoulder. You're already thinking like a king. One day, you'll have a master of coin who can handle all these matters without requiring you to cross the sea. But until then, you'll find that personal diplomacy goes a long way. Especially with the Iron Bank. We can't pretend they aren't a force to be reckoned with. Gendry nodded wearily. Another challenge loomed, but perhaps an easier one than civil war. He might sail to Braavos, negotiate new terms, show the free cities that Westeros was no longer a land of chaos. And maybe, he could also look for Arya while he was there. Who knew which far corners of the world she had reached? As Tyrion left, Sansa approached, having overheard some of their conversation. Do you intend to go? Braavos is a long journey. Eventually, yes, Gendry admitted. I'd prefer to wait until things are more settled, but Tyrion's right. It's necessary. She studied him, a hint of concern in her eyes. Will you take a large retinue? The sea is perilous these days. He tilted his head, half smiling. Would you think me a fool if I asked whether you'd come along? The North has endured so much, and I'd never want to keep you from your kingdom if you must return. But your counsel. He shrugged, feeling the awkwardness of being both a king and a man uncertain of his own heart. I value it. A complex emotion flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps warmth, and a flicker of regret. I must return to Winterfell soon. My people need me. But, maybe in time, if there's a stable arrangement, I could journey with you. He tried not to show his disappointment. He only nodded, acknowledging the demands on her. But the thought of losing her steady presence, even temporarily, unsettled him. He realized that he had grown dependent on her advice, and on her companionship. Before she departed a few weeks later, they walked the castle grounds one last time. It was early morning, the sky tinged pink, and the city below stirred with the new day. They stopped at the keep's main gates, where her northern retinue and carriages awaited. Gendry's bannermen assembled respectfully. Sansa turned to Gendry, her cloak draped over her shoulders, a symbol of her rank as queen in the north. You'll do fine, she said softly. You have Tyrion, you have loyal lords, and you have your own good sense." He offered a crooked grin. "I'll try not to burn the place down while you're gone." A faint laugh escaped her, tinged with sadness at their parting. She stepped forward and, in a gesture that stunned him, placed a gentle hand on his cheek. He felt his heart pound. Then, with quiet resolve, she leaned in and brushed a kiss to his forehead, regal and yet intimately tender. "Thank you for trusting me," she whispered. "And for letting me trust you." He had no words, only a rush of emotion. He bowed his head, then found his voice, raw and honest. "Safe travels, Your Grace. The realm stands stronger because of you." Their eyes locked, unspoken understanding passing between them. Then she turned, mounted her horse, and with a final nod to him, she led her retinue out of the Red Keep's gates. Gendry stood watching long after she vanished from sight, the crown on his head feeling heavier than ever. He wondered whether this was what it meant to be a king, bound to duty, forced to watch those you care about depart, uncertain when or if they would return. He pivoted, walking back into the keep. Courtiers and servants bowed, addressing him as "Your Grace," clamoring with new petitions and messages. There was no respite for a king. Yet as Gendry moved through the corridors, he felt a fresh determination that steadied his step. The realm had chosen him with the Stark Queen's blessing. He bore Robert's blood, but he carried with him the lessons of those who had shaped him. Arya's fierce loyalty, Jon Snow's quiet resolve, Sansa's patient wisdom, and even the forging discipline of the blacksmith's hammer. He would be Gendry Baratheon, the king who climbed from the gutters of Fleabottom to the highest seat in Westeros, a man tested by war and crowned in precarious peace. With Stark's support he had claimed the throne. Now came the greater challenge, to hold it not with fear or force alone, but with justice, humility, and the steadfast pursuit of the realm's well-being. Outside, the sunrise brightened over King's Landing, illuminating the battered walls and the scars of the past. In that golden light, the capital seemed almost reborn, and Gendry felt the faint spark of hope. A hope that for the first time in many years, Westeros might finally find unity without shackles, peace without tyranny. And if it faltered, he would fight for it as he had fought for everything else in his life. The forging of steel was never easy, but it yielded strength that could stand against any storm. So would he stand, crowned by destiny, yet grounded in the memory of where he had come from, and where, with the help of the Starks, he yet might lead them all. The next morning, King Gendry Baratheon rose before dawn, the city's hush still settled over King's Landing. He dressed simply, dark breeches, a leather jerkin stitched with the stag sigil over his heart, and made his way to the small courtyard where he'd set up a makeshift forge. The Red Keep loomed behind him, half-renovated, and bearing the scars of dragonfire in its blackened stones. Overhead, the sky was awash of the faintest violet, stars fading as the sun inched higher beyond the distant horizon. He lit the coals himself, pumping the bellows until the embers glowed. The simple, familiar routine, sparks dancing in the dimness, the heat radiating over his face, steadied him. Each morning, he allowed himself this reminder of who he had been. A blacksmith's apprentice from Fleabottom, forging horseshoes and cheap blades for men he never knew, never imagining that destiny would carve a path so strange it would one day place him on the Iron Throne. Now, everything was different. He had a crown hammered from the remnants of Robert's old circlet, and a realm that needed tending every day. Yet the fire in the forge remained the same as ever. The flame that melds steel is eternal. He heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw a pair of Red Keep servants approach, bearing a tray of tea and bread. They bowed low and addressed him as, "Your Grace." The words still jarred him. He smiled politely, dismissing them with a nod. Once they left, he pounded out a few nails from a small iron rod, shaping the metal with decisive blows. The clang of his hammer felt like a heartbeat that steadied his thoughts. Soon the sky brightened and the time for solitude ended. Council duties awaited. In the Grand Council chamber, still smaller than the ruined throne room but more comfortable, Tyrion Lannister was already at the table poring over ledgers. A few other council members trickled in. Sir Davos Seaworth, who had returned to the capital at Gendry's request to serve as master of ships, Lord Royce, representing the Vale's interests, and Lady Meredith Rampton, a lesser noblewoman from the Crown lands who had proven invaluable at organizing supply routes into King's Land. Gendry took his seat at the head. He didn't wear the crown for routine meetings. It felt too pompous. But the presence he carried was enough that all turned their attention to him. Tyrion cleared his throat. Your Grace, we have business from the Iron Bank. They request a formal audience to negotiate the outstanding debts from prior reigns. The sums are substantial. In addition, an envoy from Volantis has arrived, hoping to establish new trade terms now that the realm is stabilizing. Gendry leaned forward, elbows on the table. When are they expecting to see me? Tyrion glanced at a parchment. By the end of the week, if possible. The Iron Bank envoy insists on meeting you personally. They're testing the measure of the new king, no doubt. As for the Volantine delegation, they've set up in the merchant's quarter. I've already extended the courtesy of our protection. They say they come offering fine wares from the Jade Sea, but we both know what they truly want is favorable tariff terms. Davos spoke up then, voice thick with his old smuggler's accent. We should be wary. Volantis sometimes trades in items less savory than silks and spices. Slavery is illegal in Westeros, but they'll test our laws if they think they can find profit. Gendry nodded. I won't permit any form of slave trade here, not while I breathe. Let them know that. We can still trade goods, but if they even hint at human trafficking, I'll have them thrown back onto their ships. Everyone murmured agreement. Gendry turned to the next matter. Lord Royce explained that the Vale had begun sending shipments of grain and stone toward King's Landing for reconstruction, but caravans reported trouble along the Rose Route. There were scattered outlaws and bandits, remnants of the rebel groups that had once caused havoc in the Crown lands. Gendry listened carefully, then authorized additional Crownlander guards to patrol the Rose Route and ensure safe passage. The conversation shifted to smaller details, coin allocations for repairing the city's aqueducts, ensuring the city watch was adequately provisioned, discussing the potential for new farmland just beyond the capital's walls. All of it was critical, the unglamorous machinery that kept the kingdom running. Gendry had discovered that these everyday decisions mattered more than grand battles ever did, because they shaped whether people had bread to eat and roofs over their heads. By midday, the council adjourned for a short break. Gendry rubbed at his eyes, feeling the weight of so many tasks. Tyrion, however, seemed invigorated. The hand thrived on complicated politics. He lingered at Gendry's side as the others stepped out. How are you finding it, Your Grace? Tyrion asked, sipping a cup of watered wine. The yoke of governance proving heavier than a blacksmith's hammer. Gendry managed a small grin. A different kind of heaviness. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of the forge. But I can't pretend I don't care about this. People look to me for answers. I have to give them something. Tyrion lifted a brow, considering him carefully. I have to say, you surprise me daily. Kings usually crave power, or else they resent it. You seem to bear it like a man who found it left at his doorstep. That might be good for the realm. A reluctant king who's grown into his duties often does far better than one who leaps at the chance to wear a crown. One. Gendry shrugged. I want to do right, and I have good people around me. Sansa, he caught himself, remembering she was far away in Winterfell, ruling the north. A flicker of longing passed through him. Anyway, I'd be lost without you and the rest of the council too. Tyrion's gaze flicked to him with a hint of amusement. Ah yes, Her Grace, the Queen in the north. I've seldom seen two people more naturally aligned in how they govern. It's a pity we can't unify the realms fully, but I suspect independence means everything to the north. Yeah. Gendry swallowed a remark he wasn't certain he wanted to share. Instead, he tapped a finger on the table. Yes, well, that's how it stands. We should get back to work then. The Iron Bank isn't going to wait. They continued through the day, meeting with visitors and functionaries in the Red Keep's partially restored audience hall. The Iron Bank's envoy, a slender, sharp-featured Braavosi named Tyero, arrived with a pair of scribes. They bowed formally, though their eyes darted about in calculating assessment. Gendry greeted them with all the dignity he could muster, which was less about grandeur and more about directness. You must be tired from your journey. Have you eaten? Tyero smiled politely. We thank you for your hospitality, Your Grace. Braavos looks forward to renewed friendship with Westeros. Tyrion, standing at Gendry's right, studied the envoy. The realm does owe the Iron Bank a considerable sum from prior reigns. The Targaryen queen's short but destructive campaign did not exactly settle old accounts. Nor. Terrero's face remained impassive. We understand, yet the Iron Bank expects to be paid, perhaps over time with an agreed-upon interest. We are not without reason. If your realm thrives under your rule, your grace, then we have confidence you'll honor the debts. They negotiated for hours. Gendry focused on maintaining a respectful but unyielding stance. He refused interest rates that would strangle the rebuilding efforts, but he recognized the realm's obligations. Eventually, they arrived at a plan, a long-term repayment schedule at a modest rate, with the Iron Bank providing a line of credit for immediate infrastructural repairs. Both sides left the meeting with cautious optimism. Gendry exhaled in relief. That was one potential disaster averted. Yet the day was not done. Word spread of a disturbance in the Crownlands near Rosby. Bandits had attacked a merchant caravan, leaving several dead. The merchant had ties to House Rampton, and Lady Meredith demanded swift action. Gendry summoned the city's commander, who organized a patrol. The city watch was spread thin, so Gendry authorized sending a small contingent of knights with them, ensuring the bandits would be dealt with decisively. Such constant whack-a-mole with outlaws was draining, but at least each success meant fewer pockets of organized lawlessness. Night fell. Gendry returned to his private chambers, half-starved and bone-weary. A simple supper waited: roasted vegetables, salted fish, and fresh bread. He ate quietly, reflecting on the day's events. The city hummed beyond the walls, torches flickering in the streets. The memory of Sansa's departure still lingered. Would that he could have walked beside her in Winterfell's courtyards, discussing governance under the old weirwood's shade. But the king's duty lay here. She had her own in the north. He pushed aside those thoughts, reminding himself that they'd parted with mutual understanding. Perhaps they would see each other again soon, if the realm stayed calm. For now, he was King Gendry Baratheon, and there was no place for longing in a day's labor. But the realm's calm was fragile. Trouble arrived from the west weeks later, in the shape of a ragged band of refugees that staggered into King's Landing. They were from Lannisport, they said, and they claimed a new threat loomed in the Westerlands. According to their stories, a self-styled warlord, some former Lannister bannerman named Sir Orland Lefford, had taken advantage of Casterly Rock's weakened leadership to carve out his own territory. He was mustering men, promising them plunder and glory, stirring talk of restoring Lannister pride. The more Gendry learned, the more this sounded like a budding revolt. The Westerlands were not fully stable since the fall of House Lannister's main branch, and Tywin's ghost seemed to loom over everything. Tyrion scowled when he heard, a dark flicker passing behind his eyes. "He's a distant cousin of the Leffords, or so I recall," Tyrion muttered in the council chamber. "They once held lands near the Gold Road. Ambitious lot. If he's rallying men with Lannister gold, it may be old caches Tywin hid away." Gendry grimaced. "We can't let a warlord run rampant. The Westerlands are battered enough. Does Sir Orland intend to claim the entire region, or is he just seizing local power?" "No, it's hard to say," said Tyrion. "Reports vary, but if he's been raiding villages, extorting them in exchange for protection, we must act. The local lords might unify to stop him, but many are too frightened or disorganized. I fear they'll look to you, Your Grace, as a symbol of the Iron Throne's authority." That was what Gendry had both dreaded and expected, a direct confrontation. He'd already faced down rebels in the Crownlands, but a larger conflict in the Westerlands would be far more complicated. The region had resources, fighting men, and old feuds that ran deeper than any map lines. And then there was Tyrion's presence, a Lannister by birth, though he bore little love for those who clung to the old ways. Gendry wondered if the new warlord might try to scapegoat Tyrion or spin propaganda that the dwarf had betrayed his family legacy. "We should try diplomacy first," Gendry suggested. "Send an envoy to Sir Orland, see if we can dissuade him. If that fails, we'll muster a force. I don't want the realm plunged into more bloodshed if we can avoid it." Tyrion blew out a breath. "I'll write to some Westerlands lords who remain loyal to the crown. Perhaps they can intercept him or at least glean more information." They agreed on a plan. Dispatch a royal messenger under the king's seal to Lannisport, summoning Sir Orland to lay down arms, and urging the local lords to reaffirm loyalty to the new reign. Meanwhile, Gendry authorized the mustering of a modest force from the Crown Lands and the Stormlands, to be ready should Sir Orland refuse. The realm's unity was precarious. Another open conflict so soon would test the loyalty and patience of all. As the muster quietly began, King Gendry called upon trusted captains, men who had proven themselves in earlier skirmishes. He wrote to Storm's End, requesting a contingent of a few hundred seasoned knights. The Crownlands could contribute more. That might suffice if the Westerlands didn't rise in full-scale rebellion. The next days crawled by in tense anticipation. Rumors trickled in. Sir Orland had seized a minor fortress, forcibly married the daughter of a local lord, and begun calling himself Protector of the West. A brazen challenge. The question was not if Gendry would respond, but how quickly and decisively. Meanwhile, the practical side of ruling ground on. Envoys from Volantis arrived for another round of talks about trade. Gendry balanced these negotiations with the War Council, forced to pivot between speaking politely of trade tariffs with one group and discussing tactics for subduing a rogue warlord with another. Tyrion quipped that the king's table was half laden with maps of shipping lanes and half laden with maps of the Westerlands. Gendry found no humor in it. Each passing day made him more restless. He had grown into the role of a king who was not afraid to lead from the front. The memory of his father, Robert, loomed. Robert had waged war to seize the throne, forging alliances and smashing the Targaryen dynasty. Gendry had no desire to emulate Robert's reckless appetite for conflict, but he understood that to appear weak would only invite more chaos. A fortnight after the council's decision, word arrived by Raven. Sir Orland had refused the king's summons outright, mocking Gendry's bastard blood and declaring that the Westerlands would never yield to a blacksmith's boy. He boasted that the ghost of Tywin Lannister stood beside him. According to rumors, he was rallying scattered Lannister loyalists who still nursed resentments against the crown for the destruction Daenerys had wrought. Many had lost kin in the final battles for King's Landing, and they harbored a bitter hatred for Targaryens, Starks, and anyone they perceived as allied to them. Gendry's forging of a new Baratheon monarchy apparently wasn't enough to quell those old grudges. Tyrion looked grim when he shared the Raven's contents. He's openly challenging you to come crush him. This is a power play, Your Grace. If you hesitate too long, some lesser lords might join him out of fear. Gendry tightened his jaw. Then we move. I'll ride west with the force we've assembled. We'll either make him bend the knee or remove him before this becomes a wider rebellion. Nice. Tyrion dipped his head. I'll accompany you. I know the terrain, the local politics, everything. If we can find a way to end this swiftly, we will. The next day, the gates of King's Landing opened to the thunder of hooves as King Gendry led a host of nearly 2,000 men, knights, foot soldiers, archers. Banners waved in the breeze, the crowned stag of Baratheon on a field of black. Crownlander sigils accompanied them, as did the standards of several supportive lords. Sir Braavos remained behind to manage the city's affairs with a skeleton council, ensuring that the capital did not devolve in the king's absence. Gendry chose Sir Rowland Hayford as one of his lead commanders, a stout, reliable man who had proven loyal in the fight against the earlier rebels in the Crownlands. They marched out under a warm sun, the roads dusty from lack of rain. The men murmured among themselves, uncertain whether they marched into a real war or a brief skirmish. Gendry tried to radiate confidence. He had to, for their sakes. Inside, he felt the old pang of nerves, the fear of leading men into battle, the knowledge that bloodshed was inevitable. But leading was his duty. The journey west was uneventful until they crossed into the Westerlands proper, where the hills rose, and the land turned rocky. Here, they found burned farmsteads, footprints of destruction that might have been inflicted by Orland's men. Peasants fled at the first sign of armed riders, fearing another round of violence. Gendry sent outriders ahead to reassure them that the king's army meant no harm to law-abiding folk, but the small folk were skittish after so many cycles of war. One evening, Tyrion led Gendry's command staff to a vantage point overlooking a valley. "There's an old fortress near that bend in the river," Tyrion said, pointing. "A ruin from the time of Tytos Lannister. If Sir Orland's occupying it, he'll have vantage over the main roads. That will make it tricky for a frontal assault." Gendry studied the rolling terrain. We'll see if we can approach from the south where the hills provide cover. If he has sentries, we'll take them quietly. If not, we might be able to bottle him in." They planned late into the night, and come dawn, the army advanced with caution. Sure enough, scouts returned with confirmation. Sir Orland and a force of maybe 700 or 800 men occupied that old fortress, known as Copper Hill Keep. Gendry had superior numbers, but an assault on a defended fort would be costly. Tyrion suggested parley. If Orland refused, they'd try to draw him out into open battle. They established camp out of bow range. Gendry sent a herald to the gates carrying a white banner. The herald returned an hour later, shaken. "My lord king," he said. They responded with arrows. One nearly hit me. I heard men on the walls jeering, calling you an upstart. He paused, licking his lips. They shouted that if you're so eager to prove yourself a real Baratheon, you should tear down the castle with your hammer. Tyrion snorted. A charming lot, so much for negotiations. Gendry's face was set like stone. Then we deal with them the hard way. He spent the rest of the day organizing his forces for a siege. It wouldn't be easy. The keep's walls were old, but still formidable. He planned to cut off their supply lines first, preventing any escape or reinforcement. Perhaps Orland would come out to fight rather than starve inside. At dusk, Gendry walked the perimeter of the camp, checking on the men. Tents dotted the hillside, torches flickering. Knights polished their armor, archers checked bowstrings, squires ran about with messages. A hush of anticipation lay over it all. The men called him Your Grace, but some recognized in him a calm figure that reminded them of Robert's earlier legends, the good-natured, accessible part of Robert's memory. Gendry knelt at one campfire, exchanging a few words with the watch, making sure they had enough rations. He'd known hunger in Flea Bottom. He wouldn't let his men face that if it could be helped. As he rose to move on, Tyrion caught up with him, short legs hurrying to match Gendry's stride. "We'll see action soon, I suspect. Men like Orland don't hole up waiting to starve. He'll likely sally forth or attempt a breakout, especially if he hopes to unify other would-be rebels in the Westerlands." "I knew." Gendry nodded. "We have watchers on every side. Let's pray we can end this quickly. I hate to think of the slaughter if they try to hold the keep." That night, Gendry hardly slept. He lay in his command tent, listening to the distant hoot of owls, the clink of guard patrols. Memories of earlier battles flashed before him. The brutal melee in King's Landing, the carnage on the field outside the city walls. And older ghosts, the forging fires in Flea Bottom, his mother's face, though he barely remembered it. The realm had come so far, yet here they were, on the brink of more killing. But in the morning, he rose and readied himself, strapping on armor hammered to fit his broad shoulders, the stag sigil painted on his shield. He carried a war hammer, reminiscent of Robert's famed weapon, though less ostentatious. As the sun's first rays gleamed across the camp, horns sounded, men assembled in ranks, and the siege began. Gendry advanced carefully, placing archers on the ridges to lay down cover. They had a couple of scorpions, large siege crossbows, for dealing with defenders on the walls. The knights formed columns, braced to push forward if needed. Sir Roland led one flanking group, while Gendry stayed with the central line, Tyrion by his side to give counsel. At first, Orland's men remained inside the keep, launching arrows and rocks from the battlements. A few men on Gendry's side fell, but the injuries were relatively light. Around midday, a horn blew from the fortress, and a column of horsemen charged out of the gate. Orland presumably led them himself, clad in half-plate that bore a golden lion's head, as though he'd stolen old Lannister heraldry for his own. Gendry's forces met them in a crash of steel. Horseflesh slammed against shields, lances splintered on armor. Archers loosed shafts. The melee was chaotic, dust churning, men shouting. Gendry spurred his own horse into the fray, raising his hammer. He swung it with controlled fury, clanging against a rebel rider shield, unseating him. Another came at him with a sword. Gendry blocked with his shield, then slammed the hammer down, hearing the crunch of metal and bone. He had no time to dwell on the gore. More rebels poured out of the gate, on foot now, hoping to exploit any gap. But Gendry's lines held firm. Tyrion barked commands from behind the ranks, coordinating archers to pick off men who strayed too far. A group of loyal knights formed a wedge that drove deep into the rebel ranks. The rebels fought viciously, spurred by the promise of vengeance and gold, but they had fewer numbers. Gendry's men gradually surrounded them, forcing them back toward the gate. The fortress loomed, and it seemed Orland realized his gambit had failed. With a bellow, he hacked down one of Gendry's knights, then spurred his horse around, retreating to the keep's entrance. His surviving men limped after him, leaving bodies scattered in the dust. The gates slammed shut, but not before Gendry's forces pinned a portion of the rebels outside. Those hapless men found themselves quickly overwhelmed. Some surrendered, casting down weapons, kneeling in the dirt, bloodied and exhausted. Others died fighting. When it ended, the field reeked of sweat and blood. Gendry dismounted, panting. He looked around at the carnage. Good men on both sides lay fallen. But the fortress still stood. How many more would die if Orland refused to yield? Gendry gave orders to treat the wounded, gather prisoners, and set a watch in case Orland tried another sortie. He personally walked among the injured, ensuring they received water and basic aid. He didn't stop even when a few rebel prisoners cursed him, calling him a bastard king. Others looked numb, eyes hollow. They were done fighting. Later, Tyrion approached Gendry, wiping blood and dust from his brow. That was a well-timed stand. We've driven them back inside. Now we can starve them out, or we can try a direct assault. My guess is Orland will not yield easily. Gendry mulled it over. An assault will be costly, but every day we wait, we risk reinforcements or some other mischief. We can't linger here indefinitely. I'll give them one more chance at surrender. He had a herald call out to the fortress walls. The same arrow-riddled banner of truce was raised. Through a battered gatehouse, a single figure emerged, a rebel soldier carrying Orland's message. The man's face was bruised, eyes burning with defiance. He shouted that Orland swore never to bend the knee to a blacksmith's spawn. If Gendry wanted the keep, he'd have to take it by force. Gendry felt his stomach tighten. He dismissed the messenger and turned to Tyrion with a nod. Prepare the assault. We have no choice now. By the next morning, they were ready. Ladders, ropes, and a small battering ram for the weakened gate. Gendry assigned men to multiple approaches, hoping to divide the defenders' attention. At dawn, horns blared. Arrows rained down from the towers. Gendry's archers responded in kind, picking off any rebel fool enough to show his head above the parapets. Men raced forward with shields held high, carrying ladders to the walls, their boots churning up dust. Gendry led the main push at the gate, bracing the ram while crossbow bolts thudded into wood. The gate shuddered under repeated blows, until at last it cracked. When the splintered gate burst inward, Gendry and his knights surged through in a roar of metal on stone. Inside the courtyard, rebel defenders scrambled. Close quarters combat erupted, swords shrieking against shields. Gendry brought his hammer around in swift arcs, knocking men aside. His arm burned with every swing, sweat dripping into his eyes. The keep stank of old straw and blood. Overhead, men scaled the walls on ladders, toppling defenders who tried to cut the ropes. Tyrion remained behind the front lines, coordinating archers who fired from vantage points. He did not relish fighting hand to hand, but his voice carried as he directed men to choke off escape routes and secure the fortress yard. The defenders were outnumbered, but they fought with savage desperation. Gendry saw one knight, an older man with graying hair, kneel after being speared in the thigh, then get cut down by a rebel's sword. The chaos was relentless. Step by step, Gendry's men pushed deeper into the fortress. The courtyard was theirs soon enough, the surviving rebels driven back into the keep's main hall. There, Orland made his last stand. Gendry kicked through the battered double doors, splinters flying, men pouring in behind him. Orland stood with a ring of supporters, his golden lion crest spattered with blood. His eyes blazed with hatred as they locked on Gendry. So the bastard dares come himself, Orland snarled, raising a longsword. I'll show you how a true Lannister bannerman fights. Without further words, Gendry signaled his men to halt the general press. He stepped forward, hammer in hand. You'll kill more of your men if you don't yield, he called, though the words rang hollow in the charged air. This man had already shown he had sacrificed them all for his pride. Orland spat on the ground. Yield to a no-name blacksmith. My blade will do the talking. He lunged, sword whistling. Gendry barely brought up his hammer in time, the clang of steel jolting his arms. Orland pressed the attack, quick for a man of his size. Gendry circled, parrying each swing, scanning for an opening. Their clash echoed through the hall. Around them the fight continued in pockets. Men of Gendry's guard squared off against Orland's supporters. Tyrion hovered near the doorway with a detachment of archers, ensuring no reinforcements came from behind. Gendry focused on Orland, meeting each blow. The rebel knight was skilled, but anger fueled him more than precision. Gendry let the man tire himself with wild strikes, then capitalized on an overextended lunge. He pivoted, slamming the hammer into Orland's chest plate. A sharp screech of tortured metal rang out. Orland stumbled back, gasping for breath, but launched another desperate swing. Gendry ducked, then swung the hammer in a brutal upward arc. It connected with Orland's sword arm, shattering bone. The knight cried out, dropping his blade. Gendry kicked it aside, breathing hard. Orland collapsed to his knees, agony twisting his face. Blood seeped around the cracked armor. He glared up at Gendry, hatred mingling with despair. Gendry lifted his hammer again, heart hammering in his chest. A hush fell over those nearby, as though time paused. He pictured the destruction Orland had wrought, the innocents murdered, the men's lives had wasted in this fruitless rebellion. The old law would say such a traitor deserved immediate execution. Yet Gendry hesitated. Was this the moment to show mercy, or justice? Orland snarled through clenched teeth. Finish it, bastard king. Or do you lack the stomach? Gendry exhaled, lowering the hammer slightly. You wanted a fight, you got one, you've lost. He looked around at the men watching. Bind him, we'll bring him to trial before the realm. Let him answer for his crimes, I won't grant him the easy way out. Orland spat again, but he was in no condition to resist. Two knights seized him, pulling his arms behind his back. The rebel defenders who still lived dropped their weapons, seeing their leader defeated. The fortress was taken. In the aftermath, Gendry ordered that the wounded be tended. Bodies of both sides were collected. The keep's dungeons were used to hold Orland's men. Tyrion surveyed the grim scene with a heavy sigh. At least it's over. The Westerlands might see sense now that their so-called champion is bound and bloodied. Gendry offered a tired nod. Let's hope so. We'll root out any of his remaining pockets of support, but maybe others will yield without more bloodshed. They spent days securing the region. Some local lords, upon hearing of Orland's defeat, hastened to declare their loyalty to King Gendry, grateful for the restoration of order. Gendry accepted their fealty, though he vowed to keep a careful eye on them. They prepared to take Orland back to King's Landing, where he would face judgment. A battered hush settled over the area, farmland trampled by armies yet again. As Gendry's host marched eastward, the local peasants watched from a distance with equal parts caution and hope. When at last they drew near King's Landing, a throng of onlookers gathered to see the so-called warlord of the West brought low. The city watch parted the crowd as Gendry's men rode in, Orland and a handful of his top supporters bound on horseback under heavy guard. Some small folk jeered, throwing rotten vegetables. Orland's gaze flicked about in rage. Gendry felt little satisfaction in the spectacle. Too many had died already. They processed into the Red Keep, stabling their horses in the yard. Tyrion directed that Orland be placed in a secure dungeon cell. The warlord glowered at the walls, cursing the bastard king under his breath. Gendry left the man to the guards and retreated to the council chamber to report on the success of their campaign. Sir Davos, Lady Meredith, and other council members greeted them with relief. Davos clapped Gendry on the back, wearing a proud smile. The city's been calm in your absence, your grace. Folks are cheering that you put down another rebellion. They say King Gendry does what must be done, quickly and fairly. Gendry let out a weary breath. I'm glad we prevented a bigger war, but we must deal with Orland's trial swiftly. Let it be public, so no one can claim we hid behind closed doors. They agreed. Over the next days, Gendry presided over a formal hearing in the half-restored throne room. King Bran had once used it, now it served Gendry's reign. The charred pillars and partially melted windows were still undergoing repairs. Torches cast flickering light across the scuffed floor. Orland stood before Gendry, shackled, wearing a torn surcoat. He displayed no remorse, hurling slurs at the crown. Witnesses testified to his raids and forced conscriptions. Gendry sat in the old seat of kings, the Iron Throne's jagged sword shadowing him, listening with a taut expression. Tyrion presented the charges systematically, leaving no doubt of Orlyn's guilt. In the end, the warlord was sentenced to death for treason, murder, and rebellion against the lawful king. Gendry gave the order with solemnity, no relish. The execution took place the following dawn in the courtyard before a small gathering of witnesses, lords, commoners, and members of the city watch. Gendry observed from a short distance, remembering Ned Stark's old code, the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. But his warhammer was hardly suited for a clean beheading, so Sir Roland performed the deed. The blade fell, and with that, Orlyn's life ended. Gendry felt only a heavy emptiness. Another life lost to pride and hatred. Yet the realm breathed easier. The Westerlands settled under local leadership more loyal to the crown, and news of Orlyn's death traveled swiftly, discouraging other would-be rebels. For the moment, peace prevailed. Still, Gendry knew how fragile it was. The realm's unity required constant vigilance. One late afternoon, after these grim events, Gendry found a quiet corner in the gardens behind the Red Keep. They were smaller now, parts still burned, but a few old shrubs and a single gnarled tree had survived. He sat on a stone bench, removed his gloves and buried his face in his hands for a moment, releasing a tremulous breath. How many times would he have to condemn men to die? How many battles would it take before the realm truly knew peace? A gentle voice stirred him from his thoughts. "Your Grace." He looked up. It was Lady Meredith Ramton, the Crownland's noble who served on his council. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes and hair streaked with silver. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to intrude. You seem troubled." Gendry lowered his hands, attempting a faint smile. "I'm fine, just tired. I know we did what had to be done with Orlyn, but it weighs on me." Lady Meredith nodded. "A good king should feel the weight of justice. Better that than to relish it. My late husband used to say, when a ruler sleeps soundly after ordering a man's death, the realm should tremble. You show mercy where you can and strength where it's needed. The people see that." He managed a grateful nod. "Thank you, my lady. I hope I'm doing enough." She hesitated, then placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You are, in my eyes, and in many others. Rest a bit, Your Grace. The realm needs you whole." "No." He thanked her as she departed. For a while he sat in the fading sunshine, letting the warmth calm him. Thoughts inevitably turned northward. Sansa's letters arrived every few weeks, containing updates on the North's recovery, mention of trade caravans, news of her negotiations with lesser houses that had once been uncertain about following a queen. She always wrote politely, never letting personal sentiments overshadow the formalities. Yet Gendry read between the lines, sensing her pride in him, her relief that the realm was inching toward stability. He penned replies in his clumsy script, hoping to convey his gratitude for her friendship and guidance. If he dared admit it, he missed her. Time rolled on. A year passed since Gendry's coronation. Winter gave way to a calmer spring, then a surprisingly hot summer. King's Landing buzzed with life. The blacksmith forges hammered day and night, producing tools and weapons, while masons rebuilt the city walls. Farmers brought produce from surrounding lands, aided by new roads. Trade blossomed with Essos, though Gendry maintained strict bans on slavery. The City Watch, under better pay and oversight, reported fewer incidents of corruption. In the Stormlands, harvests improved, and lords who once chafed under absentee rule now supported their new liege enthusiastically, seeing that Gendry truly cared about their welfare. Yet beyond the daily hum of governance, Gendry felt the realm's fractures. The Iron Islands remained restless, pressed for greater autonomy. Yara Greyjoy corresponded sporadically, reminding the crown that the Ironborn had never bent easily. Dorne had grown more cooperative, but the Dornish prince was a young, proud man who insisted on near-total independence in all but name. The North, of course, was its own kingdom, though friendly. Gendry walked a tightrope, upholding unity without strangling the unique identities of each region. On one scorching afternoon he met with Tyrion in the newly refurbished Solar, sunlight streaming through stained glass. Tyrion poured wine as Gendry flipped through ledgers. "The treasury's stable," the king remarked, "but I worry about the heavy tariffs on the western shipping lanes." might drive away trade from Old Town. If we lighten them, we risk losing revenue needed to pay the Iron Bank. Tyrion sipped his wine thoughtfully. Balancing the accounts is always a juggling act, but perhaps we could reduce tariffs on essential goods only, grain, metals, things that bolster our rebuilding, while keeping higher duties on luxury goods like Irish carpets and arbor gold. That might strike a balance. Gendry nodded, scribbling a note. I'll propose it at the next full council session. Also, I've been meaning to ask you about the plan to journey to Braavos. The Iron Bank envoys keep inviting me. Is it wise to leave the capital right now? Why? Tyrion considered. It's never wise to leave the capital if you're king. Someone always stirs trouble when the throne is vacant, but forging a personal relationship with Braavos could secure better loan terms, not to mention show the free cities that Westeros is open for trade and alliances. Perhaps we wait until the harvest is in, and the city is well provisioned, then you can travel without too much worry. Gendry leaned back, exhaling. All right, we'll aim for autumn. That gives us time to ensure everything's stable. I'll likely take a decent retinue, maybe 100 men, and see how Braavos operates behind the scenes. I've never sailed that far before, except those days when Sir Davos had me row across the Blackwater, but that was no pleasure trip. He paused, memories surfacing of that frantic escape from Melisandre's clutches. Tyrion nodded sympathetically. Braavos can be quite a place. A city of canals and great wealth, overshadowed by the Titan statue. You'll likely find it both magnificent and disquieting. They respect power, but they also admire cunning. Show them you're neither a fool nor a brute, and they'll treat you well. Nah. They continued planning. In the following months, Gendry made sure the capital was as secure as it could be. He appointed a regent council to govern during his absence, with Tyrion at its head, but Tyrion insisted on accompanying him to Braavos, so they settled on Sir Davos, Lady Meredith, and a few other trustworthy nobles to handle day-to-day affairs in King's Landing. It wouldn't be ideal, but the journey to Braavos was meant as a diplomatic mission, not an extended leave. Hopefully they'd be gone only a few weeks. As the date for departure neared, Gendry received an unexpected raven from the north. It bore Sansa Stark's seal. He broke it open to read an update on the North's harvest, the health of its people, and then a personal note. She also confided that Arya had possibly returned to the north, spotted near the Lonely Hills. Whether that rumor was true or not, Sansa hoped to confirm soon. Gendry felt his heart pound at the mention of Arya. He had not seen or heard from her in so long. She had been a friend, someone who once saved his life, someone he once nearly confessed deeper feelings for. But that had been a lifetime ago. She had chosen her own path, sailing west to discover new horizons. If she truly was in the north, Gendry wondered if she would ever venture south again to see how much things had changed. If so, he hoped she'd find a welcome in King's Landing, where her childhood nightmares once began. He wrote back to Sansa, expressing relief and caution in equal measure, and finalizing some trade matters that impacted the north. His letter was formal, but he allowed a hint of warmth. He thanked her for her unwavering support, for shaping him into a better ruler than he might have been alone. He thought about telling her how deeply he missed their conversations, but that felt too personal to put in a letter. Instead, he simply wrote that he hoped one day soon their paths would cross again. Days later, the small fleet prepared in the Blackwater Bay. The royal flagship, a sturdy war galley named Stormbringer, was stocked with provisions, gifts for the Braavosi, and a retinue of 100 soldiers. Tyrion, packing lightly, said farewell to the city with a wry grin, joking that at least this time he wasn't fleeing in a wine barrel. Gendry, clad in traveling leathers and a light cloak, oversaw the final loading. The plan was to reach Braavos in about a week of good sailing, handle their negotiations, then return. He felt a mix of excitement. This was his first official foreign trip as king, and trepidation at leaving his seat of power. When at last the sails were hoisted, Gendry stood on the Stormbringer's deck, gazing at King's Landing receding behind them. The Red Keep's red walls glowed in the morning sun, and the city's sprawl seemed both grand and fragile. Bells tolled faintly. Seagulls circled overhead. Gendry inhaled the salt air. He was leaving behind everything he had struggled to build, but only for a time, he told himself. He had to trust that the realm was strong enough to stand on its own for a few weeks. The fleet caught a favorable wind. Tyrion lurched a bit at sea, lacking a sailor's balance, but he insisted he was fine. Gendry spent hours each day with the ship's captain, learning about navigation, tides, and the intricacies of commanding a vessel. He was reminded of the endless hours he'd once spent at a blacksmith's side, gleaning knowledge. There was something refreshing about being a student again. At night, he stood on the deck, listening to the waves lap against the hull. The sky stretched endlessly, stars shimmering in patterns he could barely name. He found it calming in a way the Red Keep's corridors never were. No politics, no urgent demands. Just the ocean's breath and the knowledge that he was forging a new chapter of Westerosi diplomacy. Tyrion would sometimes join him, sharing a skin of wine and recounting stories of Essos, the time he'd traveled with a dwarf troop, or the wonders of Volantis's Long Bridge. Gendry listened with genuine interest. It was easy to forget how well-traveled Tyrion was, how many corners of the world he had seen. After several days, the Titan of Braavos loomed on the horizon, a massive statue standing guard at the entrance to the lagoon. Gendry's breath caught. He had heard tales of the Titan, but the reality was staggering. A colossal stone figure, centuries old, whose eyes glowed with signal fires. The ships navigated the channel beneath its outstretched legs, gulls wheeling in the brine-scented air. Within the lagoon, Braavos spread across a maze of canals and islands, spanned by numerous bridges. Tall, slender towers rose from the water, painted with the bright colors of the various guilds. 1,000 ships lay anchored in the harbor, traders from Pentos, Myre, Lys, and beyond, sleek pirate hunters, fisher boats. At the highest point soared the Sea Lord's palace, glittering with glass windows. Braavos was rich, proud, and unbowed by any foreign king. Gendry felt a flutter of nerves. He was used to Westeros's rough stone castles, not this display of cosmopolitan wealth. They docked at a reserved quay. The Braavosi, always organized, had assigned them a berth near the Purple Harbor, an area frequented by dignitaries. A small delegation of officials awaited them, dressed in embroidered silks, bearing the city's sigils, a moon and harp design. They greeted Gendry politely, bowing with measured courtesy. Tyrion handled some of the initial pleasantries and high Valyrian phrases, which impressed them. Gendry simply nodded, thanking them for their welcome. They were escorted through winding streets, across graceful bridges, canals shimmering beneath the midday sun. Braavos was breathtakingly alive, music drifting from open windows, exotic perfumes wafting from shops, masked courtesans gliding past. Gendry had never seen such diversity of people, men and women from every corner of Essos, some from even further east, mingling with freeborn Braavosi in the squares. Their guide led them to a grand building known as the Iron Bank's main edifice, a tall, austere structure of black marble. Guards in silver helms stood at the entrance. Terrero, the envoy who had visited King's Landing, awaited them with a gracious smile. "Welcome, Your Grace. We are honored by your presence. The Sea Lord sends his regards and invites you to dine at the palace this evening." No. Gendry thanked him, but first they were shown to accommodations in a comfortable mansion the bank maintained for visiting dignitaries. After settling, washing off the salt of the voyage, Gendry and Tyrion met with senior bank officials, discussing the realm's repayment schedule. Gendry presented them with updated ledgers, showing the progress of Westeros trade and revenue. The Braavosi were keen to see evidence that the new monarchy wasn't tottering on the brink of civil war or insolvency. Tyrion brandished a silver tongue, and Gendry answered direct questions with the blunt honesty that had become his hallmark. The bankers, unsurprisingly, probed for any sign of weakness, but Gendry held firm. By the time the meeting ended, they seemed largely satisfied. That evening, a sleek canal boat carried them to the Sea Lord's palace, a marvel of architecture set upon its own island. Torchlit canals reflected golden light on polished steps leading to a mosaic-tiled hall. The Sea Lord, a rotund man named Donaferio Nestoris, received them in a lavish chamber, full of statues and shimmering tapestries. He wore a purple robe and a wide grin, expressing delight at meeting the young king of the West. The dinner that followed was a feast for the senses. Fresh seafood spiced in ways Gendry had never tasted, wines from distant coasts, music played on curious stringed instruments. Courtiers in half-masks floated about, speaking half a dozen languages. Gendry could not help feeling out of his element, but he did his best to engage in conversation. One Braavosi noble questioned him about the possibility of Westerosi alliances, especially with the remnants of Volantis or Pentos. Another teased him about the famed Dragon Queen who had died in King's Landing. Gendry responded with cautious humor, refusing to be goaded into mocking Daenerys' memory or revealing the realm's vulnerabilities. He recognized that Braavos was a city of sharp minds and sharper deals. If they smelled advantage, they'd seize it. Tyrion was in his element, exchanging witty barbs in multiple tongues, gleaning tidbits of gossip. By the end of the night, Gendry felt exhausted, but the Sea Lord seemed well disposed toward him, praising the renewed friendship between Braavos and Westeros. Over the following days, Gendry and Tyrion navigated further talks, signing an agreement with the Iron Bank that locked in more favorable interest rates in exchange for certain trading privileges in King's Landing. The Braavosi, it seemed, wanted to expand their merchant influence in Westeros, establishing a stable corridor for goods. Gendry found the terms acceptable, so long as they violated no laws. He also made it clear that attempts to import enslaved people would be met with immediate expulsion, a point he was unyielding on. The Braavosi, having once been slaves themselves centuries ago, nodded in sympathy. Officially, Braavos championed freedom, though everyone knew there were shadowy corners in the world where coin could buy anything. Beyond the official negotiations, Gendry had a chance to see the city. He marveled at the Temple of the Moonsingers, the great statue of the Weeping Lady, the swirling carnival of colors in the Ragman's harbor. Tyrion accompanied him, pointing out lesser-known sights. A quiet courtyard where the Braavosi water dancers practiced their swordplay at dawn, the House of Black and White looming mysteriously on a distant canal. That last place made Gendry uneasy. He'd heard rumors of the Faceless Men, an assassin's guild of terrifying skill. They did not appear to trouble him or Tyrion, but the knowledge that death could be bought so easily here weighed on Gendry's mind. One afternoon, as Gendry admired a row of metalwork shops along the Purple Canal, a familiar voice behind him said, "I can't believe it's truly you." He whirled around to see a figure standing in the shade of a stone arch, slender, wearing travel-worn leathers. For a heartbeat, he thought he dreamed. Arya Stark stood there, older than his memory, her hair cropped just above her shoulders, a faint scar on her cheek. She wore no sigil, no obvious sign of her identity, but Gendry recognized her gray eyes, the resolute tilt of her chin. His breath caught in his throat. "Arya," he murmured, uncertain if she was real. A swirl of emotion flooded him, relief, astonishment, an old, buried warmth. He took a step forward. She gave him a quick, searching look, as if to confirm that this tall, regal man in well-cut clothes truly was Gendry, the boy she'd once traveled with. Then a half-smile touched her lips, rueful and amused. "You look ridiculous," she said softly. "All groomed and proper. Is that a crown in your bag?" A laugh escaped him, a strangled sound that held too many feelings. "Seven hells, Arya, we all thought you'd gone beyond the Sunset Sea. Sansa said you might be in the north." Arya shrugged. "I was in the north, briefly. Then I sailed east again, chasing rumors of someone I once knew. I ended up here, though I didn't plan to. Heard talk of a Westerosi king meeting with the Iron Bank, and I thought, that can't be Gendry. But here you are." He shook his head, trying to gather his thoughts. "I'm king now, yes. It's a long story. Bran was chosen after the war, but the realm wanted a more active ruler. They crowned me. Gods, it's mad, but..." He trailed off, noticing Arya's cautious expression, as though she was trying to reconcile her old friend with the man before her. "I'm sorry, I'm babbling. I just never thought I'd see you again." She approached a step closer, glancing around to ensure no one paid them much attention. The canal's bustle covered their conversation. "How's Sansa? Is she well?" "She's queen in the north," Gendry replied with a rueful grin. "And yes, she's done wonders up there. She misses you. We all do. The realm is healing, but there's still a lot to manage." "London." Arya's gaze flickered down, a trace of guilt in her eyes. "I never wanted a throne, or a quiet life. I had to see what lay beyond the maps. But there are ghosts in every direction, it seems." Gendry swallowed, memories swirling of the night he'd last spoken with her in Winterfell, how she'd turned down his awkward proposal that she be a Lady of Storm's End. "I'm not here to guilt you," he said gently. I'm just glad you're alive. Will you come back with me? Sansa and the others would be overjoyed. Jon might be in the north, though last I heard he still wandered beyond the wall at times. No. She gave a soft snort. I'm not sure I'm meant for king's courts, but maybe I'll consider it. Tell me, how is it that you wear a crown? You hated nobles, if I recall. He laughed, a short, ironic sound. I did. But the realm needed something after everything. Bran's a visionary but not a ruler of the day-to-day. Daenerys was gone. The old houses were in disarray. By some twist of fate they offered me the throne, and I accepted, if only to stop the bloodshed. I tried to do better than the men who came before me. Now, bye. Arya studied him a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied that he hadn't turned into a preening tyrant. All right, I'll travel with you, at least part of the way. I have some affairs to settle first. Where are you staying? He told her about the mansion near the Iron Bank, how long they planned to remain, and that Tyrion was with him. At mention of Tyrion, Arya raised a brow. The imp is your hand. Aye, and a good one, Gendry said. He's changed since those days in King's Landing. Or maybe we've all changed. She wore a small smirk. We have. She hesitated, then stepped forward abruptly and embraced him in a quick, fierce hug. He froze in surprise, then returned it, overwhelmed by the sense of her presence, the memory of traveling with her as children, the countless hardships they'd survived. When she stepped back, her expression was fleetingly tender. I'm glad to see you, Gendry. You look well. He tried to speak but found his throat tight. He settled for a nod, placing a hand on her shoulder gently. Then she slipped back, adjusting the sword at her hip. I'll find you soon, she said. We'll talk more. Don't tell too many people you've seen me. With that, she was gone, weaving into the crowd like a ghost. Gendry stood there, heart pounding, trying to piece together the whirlwind of emotion. Arya Stark, alive in Braavos, as if drawn by fate to cross paths with him once more. She'd changed physically, taller, more sinewy, a quiet intensity in her eyes. But beneath that, she was still Arya, the friend who had once kept him alive in the wilderness, the girl who had never let adversity break her spirit. He returned to the mansion in a daze. Tyrion noticed his distracted air during dinner. You look like you've seen a ghost, the dwarf commented, half joking. Gendry contemplated lying, but realized it made no sense. Arya had said not to tell too many people. But Tyrion wasn't just anyone. He could be trusted. So Gendry leaned in, speaking quietly. I saw Arya Stark today. Tyrion almost choked on his wine. Arya, as in your old traveling companion? Ned Stark's youngest daughter? The very same who slew the Night King, if the stories are true? Gendry nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She's here in Braavos, or at least passing through. She said she might come back with us to Westeros. Tyrion's eyes gleamed with curiosity. Now that is interesting news indeed. I should like to see her again. There's plenty she could teach me about improbable feats. But you sound unsettled. Gendry hesitated. I don't know. Just seeing her brought back memories, old regrets maybe. But mostly I'm glad she's alive, that she hasn't vanished entirely. Tyrion patted Gendry's arm. Your Grace, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the Starks are as resilient as direwolves. Each one has a distinct path, but they endure. Be glad you've crossed paths once more. They let the matter rest, focusing on the final negotiations before their departure. Yet Gendry found himself scanning the crowds whenever he walked the canals, hoping to catch another glimpse of Arya. True to her word, she showed up at the mansion's gate a few days later, surprising the Braavosi guards with her silent approach. Gendry welcomed her inside, offering some refreshment. She declined politely, seeming ill at ease in such a stately environment. Tyrion joined them, bowing with mock flourish. Arya tolerated him with a small smirk. They exchanged a few curt words, neither quite trusting the other, but there was no hostility. They spent an hour talking of Westeros. Arya was curious about Sansa, about Jon, about whether the realm had truly found peace. Gendry explained everything: Bran's abdication of active rule, Gendry's coronation, the minor rebellions quashed, the alliance with the North, the reorganization of the Crown's lands. She listened intently, her gaze occasionally distant as if haunted by old memories of the War of the Five Kings. Finally, she said she had business to finish that might take a week, but after that she'd sail with them if they still planned to depart. Gendry agreed. He watched her go with a sense of relief that she seemed interested in returning to Westeros if only for a time. The thought of seeing her reunited with Sansa warmed him. Perhaps their fractured family could find some measure of wholeness again. The following days were a blur of final dinners, signing official documents, exchanging gifts with the Sea Lord. Tyrion made sure every point was hammered out so there would be no nasty surprises once they returned. Gendry missed the relative simplicity of bashing problems with a hammer, but he recognized the value of diplomacy. On the 7th day, Arya returned, a small pack slung over her shoulder. She told them she was ready. It was as straightforward as that. No explanation of what tasks she had completed, no mention of goodbyes. Gendry didn't press. He had learned to let Arya keep her secrets. They boarded the Stormbringer in the early morning. The Braavos officials bid them farewell, politely reminding them to maintain the new treaty. Gendry had the sense they were satisfied with the outcome. Westeros was no longer a chaotic land to fear, but a partner to do business with. The ship slipped out of the lagoon, passing the Titan once more. Arya stood on deck, watching the colossal statue recede. Her expression was unreadable. Tyrion, bracing himself against the railing to combat seasickness, teased Arya about her preference for traveling alone. She only shrugged, remarking that traveling alone meant never having to watch a drunk dwarf vomit overboard. Tyrion chuckled, taking it in stride. Gendry watched them with a quiet smile. It felt strangely right. This mismatched group returning to Westeros together, like some echo of the earlier wars, but with roles reversed. Once, they had all been pawns, uncertain of their fates. Now, they were shapers of a new era, at least in some measure. The voyage back was smooth for the first few days. Gendry spent time with Arya, strolling the deck at night, exchanging old stories. She told him fragments of her travels west, of seeing unknown islands, the vast emptiness of the open ocean, turning back when provisions ran too low. He spoke of the burdens of kingship, how he tried to balance fairness with strength. They laughed occasionally about how improbable it all was, 2 orphans from the roads, now a king and a legendary warrior. Yet Arya never gave him the sense she was envious of his crown, or that she yearned to be in the north. She seemed curious, maybe mildly conflicted, but never regretful of her wandering. Midway across the narrow sea, storms began to brew. The captain warned them of strong winds ahead. They battened down the hatches, stowed supplies carefully. For 2 days, they fought roiling waves, sails snapping overhead. Gendry found his sea legs tested as the Stormbringer pitched violently, water spraying over the bow. Tyrion turned green, muttering curses between heaves. Arya kept to herself, eyes narrow as she rode out the storm with stoic calm. Finally they passed through the worst of it, though the winds blew them slightly off course. When land reappeared on the horizon, it was the southern shore of Cracklaw Point, rather than the usual approach to the Blackwater. They adjusted, sailing up the coast. The battered ship needed a brief rest stop of fresh water, so they anchored near a small fishing village. Gendry went ashore with a handful of guards and found the villagers uneasy but polite once they realized who he was. They offered water, some salted fish, and the local headman stammered that they were honored to serve the king. Gendry tried to put them at ease, paying a fair price. Arya walked along the shoreline, scanning the rocky beach. Gendry watched her. She was always poised, like a cat ready to spring, even when gazing at driftwood. She seemed at once older, hardened, and also the same bold spirit who had once demanded he keep her presence a secret from the Lannisters. He wondered what she had faced out there in the unknown seas. The next day, they continued on, rounding the last headlands until the familiar shape of King's Landing came into view. Smoke drifted from chimneys, and the new outer walls shone where fresh stonework had been completed. The city's sprawl embraced the harbor. Ships from Dorne and the Reach dotted the bay, a sign of ongoing trade. Gendry felt a swell of pride. This was his seat. He had left it stable, and so it remained, at least from a distance. They made port amid the usual bustle. The city watch recognized the royal galley, clearing a path. News spread fast that King Gendry had returned with Tyrion Lannister and a Stark woman in tow. By the time they reached the Red Keep, a small crowd had gathered, straining for a glimpse of Arya. Her identity wasn't publicly announced, but whispers were unstoppable. Rumors soared. Was it the Night King's slayer? Was she here to dethrone the king? People wove wild tales, but the general mood was curiosity more than hostility. Arya took it in stride, ignoring the stares. In the courtyard, Sir Davos and Lady Meredith greeted them warmly. Davos seemed visibly relieved the trip had gone well. They ushered everyone into the castle, where a quick debriefing followed. The city remained calm. Revenues had grown. No major rebellions had erupted. Gendry sighed in gratitude. It was a rare thing for a king to leave his seat for weeks and return to find order intact. Meredith teased him that maybe he should travel more often, as it apparently encouraged good behavior. Arya hung back during these official updates, examining the courtyard with a distant look. The Red Keep was partly rebuilt, but memories of what she'd endured here must have lingered. She said little, but Gendry noticed her hand occasionally drifting toward the hilt of her blade, as if expecting hidden enemies. He approached gently after the meeting. "You all right?" She shrugged, eyes scanning the ramparts. "It's strange being back. The last time I was here I was a frightened child, saw my father's head on a spike. This place holds bad memories." Gendry dipped his head in understanding. "I get it. Take your time. You're welcome to stay or go, however you wish. But if you do stay, we'll give you chambers away from the worst ghosts, I promise." Neowani. Her eyes softened a little. "Thank you, Gendry. I think I'd like to see how the city has changed, see if it's truly better." Word of Arya Stark's return to King's Landing reached the highest echelons quickly. The next morning, a raven arrived from Winterfell bearing Sansa's seal. It said she had heard the news from travelers and expressed both joy and concern for her sister. She also hinted that she might travel south for a visit, if the roads remained safe and her duties permitted. Gendry's pulse fluttered at the thought of seeing Sansa again, especially under more hopeful circumstances. But he kept that to himself, focusing on welcoming Arya properly. He gave her a tour of the city, showing her the partially rebuilt Great Sept area, now transformed into a memorial square. They passed through Fleabottom, where Gendry had once labored, though it was a bit cleaner now with fresh water lines installed. The small folk recognized the king, bowing, calling out blessings. Some cheered to see Arya in his company, calling her the wolf hero. She only stiffened at first, but as the day wore on, Gendry could sense her guard lowering slightly. There were signs of genuine improvement in these streets, fewer beggars, more children playing. At the end of the day, they climbed the city walls to watch the sunset, the sky streaked with orange and violet. Arya leaned on a parapet, the wind lifting the stray locks of her hair. She said softly, "It really has changed. I expected the city to feel the same, dirty, vicious, but the people seem hopeful." He stood beside her. "It took a lot of work, and we're not done, but we've started something that might last if we keep tending it." A faint smile curved her lips. "Good. They deserve better than what the Lannisters gave them." In the weeks that followed, Arya lingered in the Red Keep, though she often disappeared for hours, exploring or slipping into the streets in disguise, Gendry presumed. He let her roam. Meanwhile, the realm continued its slow climb to stability. Letters arrived from the Westerlands where local lords confirmed no new rebellions. The Iron Islands renewed a request for certain fishing rights. Gendry permitted partial rights, balanced by a trade agreement that discouraged raiding. In Dornham, a minor border dispute with the Reach required arbitration, which Gendry delegated to the Master of Laws. On and on it went, a litany of tasks that shaped the realm's future more thoroughly than any single battle. During this time, Gendry often found himself drawn to Arya's presence when she was around. They had shared hardships in their youth, and now they both carried responsibilities shaped by their destinies. Some nights, over a quiet supper, she would ask him about the details of governance, or tell him about glimpses of the world beyond Westeros. He realized with a pang that the years had forged her into a solitary figure, comfortable in fleeting connections. But it was still good to have her near, if only for a while. Tyrion observed them from a distance with a quirked eyebrow, occasionally teasing Gendry about the wolf at your side. But Gendry brushed it off, focusing on his duties. The person whose absence he felt most acutely remained Sansa. They corresponded regularly by Raven, Each letter carried an undercurrent of cautious warmth, as if they danced around the possibility of seeing each other again. She mentioned that winter was fading, roads clearing, and that she might come for a visit within a moon's turn. Eventually the day arrived when a northern procession was spotted approaching the city gates, banners bearing the direwolf of Stark, a score of guards in furs despite the southern warmth. Gendry stood at the top of the Red Keep's outer stairs, heart pounding with anticipation. Then he saw her, Sansa Stark, cloaked in gray and white, dismounting gracefully. Her red hair gleamed in the sunlight. A hush fell over the courtyard as watchers recognized the queen in the north. Arya was there too, standing off to the side, her expression guarded. Sansa lifted her gaze, meeting Gendry's eyes. In that moment, the bustle of the city seemed to vanish. She ascended the steps, flanked by a couple of northern bannermen. Gendry descended to meet her halfway. They exchanged formal greetings. "Your Grace, my lady." Then Sansa allowed a small, genuine smile to soften her features. "It's good to see you," she said quietly, her voice carrying warmth that made Gendry's chest tighten. He bowed over her hand, brushing a polite kiss across her knuckles. "Welcome to King's Landing," he murmured, adding in a hushed tone, "I'm glad you've come." They moved inside. Sansa greeted Tyrion with politeness. He bowed, calling her, "My queen," which prompted a wry smile. But the real moment was when she and Arya stood face to face, the older sister studying the younger. They embraced silently, heads bowed, as though sharing all their unspoken stories in that stillness. Gendry and Tyrion both looked away respectfully, giving the sisters that moment of reunion. Sansa's visit was partly personal, partly political. She wished to meet with Gendry and the small council to discuss trade routes between the North and the Crownlands, the possibility of mutual defense pacts, and the lingering question of how best to handle any future threat from beyond the Wall, where wildlings and scattered undead might remain. But beneath all that, Gendry sensed a deeper motive. She wanted to see how he was truly ruling. Whether the rumors of a just, tempered king were real, or just illusions. Over the following days, they held multiple councils, forging agreements that made trade easier for northern merchants traveling south. Sansa proposed a reciprocal arrangement for winter stores. Excess grain from the south would be shipped north in times of hardship, and in return, the north would send fur, timber, and fish down to the crown. Gendry found these terms fair, signing them willingly. They hashed out the details, ensuring tariffs wouldn't cripple small merchants. In each meeting, Gendry marveled at how deftly Sansa navigated the negotiations, never pushy, always calm, yet thoroughly prepared. She had grown into a queen who commanded respect with gentle precision. When not locked in council, they toured the city together, flanked by guards. People flocked to see the Northern Queen. Sansa wore her hair pinned back, revealing her graceful neck, a style reminiscent of her mother's. She smiled politely at the cheering small folk, occasionally stopping to speak with them. Gendry walked beside her, pointing out the new aqueduct or the rebuilt market square. He felt a sense of pride each time she nodded in approval. Arya sometimes joined them, but just as often vanished to roam on her own. That was her way, and Sansa seemed to accept it. One afternoon, Gendry took Sansa to the Red Keep's gardens, where fresh flowers had been planted in neat rows. They walked a gravel path, sunlight dancing through the leaves. The rest of the retinue hung back, giving them privacy. They spoke of the realm's slow healing, how the roads were safer, the harvest better, the outlaws fewer. Sansa's gaze lingered on Gendry's face. "You've done well," she said softly. "I was worried at first, not of you, but for you. This city can devour good men. I've seen it happen." He offered a half smile. "I've had help, yourself included, though from afar. Your letters guided me more than you know." She paused by a bed of pale blue blooms. "I only offered counsel. You did the hard part." The city needed a firm, honest hand on the helm. She glanced around and lowered her voice. "I've heard the small folk speak your name with genuine respect, not fear. That's a rare thing in a king." He felt heat rising in his cheeks, uncertain how to respond to such praise. She reached out, touching his arm lightly. They stood in a hush broken only by the distant chirp of birds. A swirl of memory filled him, her presence in Winterfell's courtyard, the trust she'd placed in him. He recalled the day she left for the north, how she had pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead, acknowledging his new path. He cleared his throat. "It means a lot, that you approve." A self-conscious laugh escaped him. I don't know why, but it does. Sansa studied him, her lips curving into a small smile that carried warmth. I'm glad. They continued walking in comfortable silence until Tyrion found them, breathless with news of an important missive from the Vale. Duty called. Sansa resumed her queenly composure, and Gendry squared his shoulders, returning to the endless swirl of decisions. That night, a feast was held in the Great Hall to honor the northern delegation's visit. The hall had been painstakingly restored, with new tapestries featuring House Baratheon's crowned stag. The once burned rafters were replaced, the walls repainted. Torches blazed, and minstrels played lively tunes. Lords and ladies from across the Crownlands mingled with the northern guests, sharing cups of ale and tales of the war's aftermath. Sansa sat to Gendry's left at the high table, while Arya drifted among the crowd, eschewing formality. Tyrion presided over the wines with typical enthusiasm. Partway through the evening, the hall's doors swung open unexpectedly, revealing a figure in traveling leathers, a dusty cloak thrown back to show silver hair. For a breathless moment, Gendry thought of Daenerys, but it was not her. This was a man, older, his features reminiscent of Targaryen lineage, but tempered by something else. Gasps rippled through the guests. Gendry narrowed his eyes, trying to recall if any known Targaryen offshoot still existed. The man advanced with measured steps, ignoring the stares. Guards moved to intercept, but Gendry raised a hand. Let him speak, he said, voice carrying across the hush. The stranger halted before the high table and bowed stiffly. His accent when he spoke carried a trace of Essos. Your Grace, Queen Sansa, I mean no offense by my sudden entrance. My name is Aenys of House Blackfyre, or so I have reason to believe. I have come to petition the crown. A murmur spread. House Blackfyre was an old Targaryen bastard branch that had sparked rebellions generations past. Everyone in the hall seemed on edge. Gendry shared a quick glance with Sansa, who looked equally startled but kept her composure. Tyrion set down his wine, eyes narrowing. A Blackfyre? Those lines were thought extinct or exiled long ago. Aenys inclined his head. I carry old scrolls that claim descent from the female line. I do not come to stir rebellion, but to seek a rightful place in the new order. I have lived in Lys, passing as a sellsword, but I grew weary of wandering. I heard Westeros had a new king, a man once called bastard yet now crowned, and I thought, perhaps there is room for me too. Suspicion bristled through the hall. One of the Crownlander lords, a squat man named Desmond Birch, rose in anger. You think the city will welcome a Targaryen pretender? After all we suffered from the Mad King's line, from Daenerys dragons? Aenys lifted his palms in a gesture of peace. I claim no dragons, no throne. I only wish to swear fealty, to serve if I may, your grace. He looked directly at Gendry. You know the sting of being called bastard. My own bloodline is tainted by centuries of rumor, but does that alone condemn me? Gendry's jaw tightened. The hall waited, tense. He thought of how Daenerys had legitimized him, how Tyrion had once believed in her cause. He thought of the devastation wrought by Targaryen fire, but also of how unfair it was to blame a single man for the sins of ancestors. If you come in peace, Gendry said slowly, you will not be harmed for your name alone, but I'll not grant you land or title simply because you claim it. We'd have to see proof, weigh it, and decide with the council's advice. A flicker of relief appeared in Aenys' eyes. Of course, your grace. I am at your disposal. Tyrion cleared his throat. We'll arrange a hearing. For now, let the man eat and rest. Guards, you'll ensure he's supervised. The tension eased slightly. The feast resumed, though much subdued, people whispering about the possible arrival of a new Targaryen offshoot. Sansa leaned toward Gendry. Be cautious, she murmured. He might be harmless, or he might be a pawn in someone else's game. Gendry nodded grimly. I will, but I won't condemn him without cause. Too many lives have been ruined by old grudges. She nodded, respecting his approach. The rest of the night passed, though the excitement had waned. Many retired early, unsettled by this development. In the days that followed, Aenys was questioned by the small council. He presented scrolls describing a lineage that traced back to the Blackfyre line, though it was all somewhat murky. Tyrion found the documents partially plausible but not conclusive. Gendry considered the possibility that Aenys sought a place in Westeros to stir trouble. But the man seemed sincere in wanting only to serve. He even offered to join the city watch or any royal guard that would have him. Gendry decided to keep him close, under watchful eyes, rather than casting him out where he might become a rallying point for malcontents. A compromise that left everyone slightly uneasy but not outraged. Meanwhile, Sansa's stay lengthened. Her negotiations concluded, yet she did not depart immediately. Gendry sensed she was enjoying her time with Arya, reconnecting, walking the city, seeing old places. One evening, Sansa confided in him that her hold on the North felt strong enough for a brief respite. The lords of the North could manage in her absence. "They trust me now," she said with a small laugh, though the older ones still mutter about a woman in charge. "But who else do they have?" Narrowdine. They sat near a window in one of the Red Keep's refurbished corridors, a breeze wafting the torches. Gendry studied the lines of her face, the subtle grace in her posture, and realized how deeply he admired her, how effortlessly she made him feel understood. "I'm glad you're here," he confessed softly. "It feels right, having you in this city." She looked at him, eyes calm. "It surprises me how natural it feels for me too. I once hated King's Landing, so many terrible memories. But seeing it reborn under your rule, perhaps it can be a place of hope now, instead of despair." Nanun. Silence settled, charged with unspoken longing. He reached for her hand, found it warm, her fingers slightly trembling. In that moment, words faltered. They both remembered the responsibilities upon them. She, Queen of the North, he, King of the Six Kingdoms. Any personal union would have far-reaching political implications. Yet the impulse to draw closer was undeniable. They might have spoken then of deeper matters, but a guard appeared, bowing hastily to deliver news. Arya had left the keep again, possibly heading north alone. She had left a brief note for Sansa, stating she would travel lightly, see more of the realm, and they shouldn't worry. Sansa sighed, folding the parchment. "She can't stay still for long. That's Arya." Gendry frowned. "Will she be safe on the roads alone?" "She'll be safer than any who cross her," Sansa said wryly. "She'll surface when she's ready." The moment of intimacy passed, replaced by the endless swirl of politics. Still, a seed had been planted between them, an acknowledgement of shared possibility. That night, Gendry struggled to sleep, turning over the question of whether a marriage alliance with Sansa Stark was an inevitable or impossible next step. He did not want to treat it as mere politics. If it happened, it should be something genuine. But genuineness in the world of crowns was a rare commodity. In the days that followed, quiet rumors circulated among the court that the King of the Six Kingdoms and the Queen in the North seemed close. Some whispered about wedding bells, others dismissed it as idle gossip. Tyrion observed with keen amusement, occasionally dropping subtle hints to Gendry about strengthening alliances. Gendry brushed him off, determined not to rush anything. Sansa, for her part, remained composed, focusing on the tasks at hand. Still, the tension simmered beneath every conversation they shared. Shortly before Sansa's intended departure back to Winterfell, a formal banquet was arranged to bid her farewell. Lords from the Crownlands and even some visiting Stormland nobles attended. The great hall filled with laughter and clinking cups. Sansa wore a gown of dark blue, embroidered with the direwolf and the crescent moon of the north. Gendry, in a doublet of royal black and gold, sat beside her at the high table. The feast was splendid, but overshadowed by a sense that she would soon be gone. Tyrion proposed a toast to Sansa's visit, praising her wisdom and graciously noting that the realm had benefited from the time she spent here. She rose to respond, her voice carrying clearly. "I thank you for your hospitality and partnership. The North stands with the Six Kingdoms, not as a subordinate but as an ally, bound by friendship and shared goals. My time here has shown me that King Gendry is forging a legacy of fairness. May we see our realms prosper side by side." "No." Applause rang out. Gendry stood next, raising his cup. He spoke haltingly, not given to fancy speeches, but he found the right words. "Queen Sansa, you honored us by coming to King's Landing. Your counsel, your presence, your unwavering dedication to your people. These remind us that leadership is not about crowns, but about service. I hope that the bond between the North and the Six Kingdoms grows ever stronger. Your people are always welcome here, as are you. He paused, meeting her eyes. Especially you. A ripple of murmurs followed that last line, but he didn't care. Sansa held his gaze, a faint blush on her cheeks. Then the hall erupted in another wave of cheers. The feast carried on with boisterous conversation, and at one point, the minstrels struck up a dancing tune. Lords and ladies took to the cleared floor. Tyrion hopped off the dais, snatching a startled southern lady's hand to lead her into a lively step. Others followed, swirling in bright colors. Gendry turned to Sansa. In the flickering torchlight, her hair gleamed like copper set aflame. He extended a hand, an uncertain smile on his lips. "Would you honor me with a dance, my lady?" She hesitated, a thousand memories flicking across her eyes. Forced dances at King's Landing under Joffrey's mocking gaze, formal steps in the Vale, the dreaded illusions of courtesy. Yet this was different. She placed her hand in his. "I will," she said quietly. They rose and stepped onto the dance floor. The music was a moderate tempo, a simple courtly pattern. Gendry was not an accomplished dancer, but he tried to move with care, remembering how Sansa's grace could guide him. They circled among other couples, the watchers on the sidelines murmuring in interest. Sansa's eyes never left his face, and for a moment, it was as though the burdens of the realm melted away. Each step felt like a quiet conversation in motion. He ventured a soft remark. "I've never been good at dancing. I'm more at home with a hammer." She smiled, kindly teasing. "You're not so hopeless. At least you haven't stepped on my toes yet." "Ah." He huffed a laugh, keeping his steps measured. The music swelled, reached a flourish, and they parted, then came together again. Her hands in his felt delicate but steady. He was aware of every onlooker, but right now, he cared only that Sansa was smiling, that he could be near her without politics overshadowing every breath. When the tune ended, applause scattered through the hall. They inclined their heads to each other politely, though Gendry's chest was pounding. He escorted her back to the dais. Tyrion gave him a knowing look as if to say, that was quite a performance. Gendry just shrugged, an odd mixture of nerves and contentment swirling within him. Later that night, as the feast died down, Sansa excused herself. Gendry walked her partway to her chambers, escorted by northern guards. At the threshold they paused. Lantern light cast shifting patterns on the stone floor. She turned to him, expression thoughtful. "I'll leave on the morrow," she said softly. "I must return to Winterfell. Spring's coming and there's much to do." He nodded, his heart sinking. "I understand." She looked at him steadily. "You can always send word if you need me, or if anything changes." He swallowed. "Sansa, He hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "I'd give much to have you stay, but I know your duty. I won't ask you to forsake it." She touched his cheek lightly, the gesture echoing their parting once before. "And I yours. We're both bound to our peoples, but maybe our paths will continue to cross. Maybe one day we can forge something stronger between the North and the Six Kingdoms. Not just treaties." Her voice caught slightly. "I'd like that." He bent his head, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "So would I." A soft exhale passed between them, carrying a promise that might one day be fulfilled. Then, with careful resolve, Sansa drew back. She opened her chamber door, stepping inside. Gendry bowed his head, turning away. The door closed quietly. Early morning saw Sansa depart with her retinue, riding out of the city gates at first light. Gendry watched from the battlements, the banners of the direwolf and the king's stag stirring in the dawn breeze. Once again, she left behind an emptiness in him, tempered by hope. He had no illusions that the burdens of rule would vanish, or that a union with Sansa would be simple. But perhaps, as she had said, they could forge something stronger one day. In the weeks after Sansa's departure, life returned to its usual rhythm in King's Landing: council sessions, letters from lords, trade disputes. Aenys Blackfyre lingered quietly, training with the city watch, trying to prove he wasn't a threat. Arya was gone, somewhere on the roads. Tyrion oversaw expansions of the harbor. Sir Davos negotiated shipping routes. Gendry found fleeting peace in the everyday tasks of governance. Yet the memory of dancing with Sansa in the Great Hall hovered like a sweet echo. A few courtiers dropped hints about the possibility of a royal wedding. Gendry feigned a neutral response, not wanting to invite speculation. The realm had enough intrigue without adding more. Summer heat pressed down on the city and the common folk bustled with new energy. Markets flourished. Children played without fear of war. Gendry took satisfaction in seeing a stable kingdom, though he knew storm clouds could gather swiftly. Indeed, distant thunder rumbled from the direction of the Iron Islands, where Yara Greyjoy bickered anew about independence. Dorne, too, rattled sabers over an old boundary disagreement. The tapestry of alliances always needed mending. Gendry hammered out solutions with the help of Tyrion and the council. One hot afternoon, Tyrion brought a message from the Iron Bank. The Braavosi were satisfied with Westeros payments thus far, though they requested Gendry's presence for a review next year. He groaned. Another sea voyage, but at least there was time to prepare. He wrote a polite reply, reminding them that stability was the best assurance of repayment. Meanwhile, letters from the Stormlands and Crownlands indicated healthy harvests, reason for modest celebration. Gendry ordered partial relief of taxes on small farmers, hoping to ensure they could rebuild fully. It was a small kindness that might yield loyalty in the long run. Amid these mundane affairs, Gendry sometimes found respite in forging small items in his private smithy. One evening, after a long day of signatures and negotiations, he heated metal to craft a new pommel design, shaping it into the outline of a running wolf. He told no one the significance, but the design pulled him back to the memory of Sansa's cloak bearing the direwolf. Each strike of the hammer was an echo of old emotions, forging something tangible from longing. When the piece cooled, he set it aside in a chest. Perhaps one day he'd give it to her. The months slipped by. The realm moved closer to a full year of peace, something rare in living memory. King's Landing's reconstruction advanced. Murals replaced the scorched walls. A public fountain was erected where the Great Septi once stood, a symbol of cleansing the city's past. Gendry continued receiving thanks and petitions from across the realm. He conducted tours to the Westerlands, the Reach, reaffirming alliances. Everywhere he went, he found pockets of hope and pockets of discontent. That was the nature of ruling. And so the days turned into seasons. Rumors about Gendry's personal life cropped up in every corner. Some said he would marry a Stormlander lady, others that he would seek a foreign princess. But no betrothal was announced. The king in the south and the queen in the north remained two strong pillars, separated by distance yet aligned in spirit. Some lords speculated that a grand unification might occur. Others insisted the north would never kneel again. Gendry let them talk, focusing on the tasks at hand. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, he dreamed of a future where the north and the south were bound, not by the forced submission of old, but by genuine respect and love. He pictured a day when he might share a table with Sansa, discussing how to cultivate farmland or open trade routes, no longer as distant allies but as partners in every sense. He did not know if fate would grant them that chance, or if the storms of politics would tear them apart first. Yet each letter they exchanged kept the flame alive, forging hope from the steel of perseverance. One evening, Gendry stood upon the battlements of the Red Keep, gazing out at the city that glowed with lamplight against the velvety sky. His Kingsguard, still a modest corps, as he'd never wanted an overwhelming retinue, stood discreetly. He breathed the warm night air, reflecting on how far he'd come from the boy who hammered steel in Flea Bottom. So much had changed, wars fought, crowns claimed, new alliances forged. Yet he remained, in his core, the same man who valued honesty, loyalty, and the simple satisfaction of making something better than it was before. He thought of Robert Baratheon, the father he'd barely known, who had seized the throne through a war that toppled dragons. Gendry's path had been different, one shaped by forging peace rather than smashing foes. Perhaps that was the final legacy of House Baratheon, from war to rebuilding, from a hammer that broke to a hammer that mended. With Stark support, he had taken a throne that no one else could hold without fracturing the realm anew. Now, day by day, he built a better world, one that might, at last, outgrow the shadows of its past. And so, with the winds of summer drifting across the darkened city, King Gendry Baratheon closed his eyes and let the enormity of it all wash over him. Tomorrow there would be more challenges, new letters, fresh schemes. But tonight he allowed a moment of gratitude, that he was still standing, that the realm was healing, and that, out there in the north, lived a queen who believed in him. The forging of steel might be unending, but each spark brought new light, and each hammer stroke shaped the world into something stronger than before.